Samuel Tarley had once believed that his greatest acts of heroism would never venture beyond the small compass of learning how to hold a sword without trembling. As a boy, he'd been taught that fear was something to be mastered, or at least hidden away. In his father's eyes, there was no greater shame than cowardice, and from the time Sam could toddle, Randall Tarley had tried to toughen him up in ways Sam found only terrifying. Now, he was the man who'd crossed the wall, ventured beyond it, survived the terrors of the undead, and come back south, duty-bound to help keep the living alive. And yet, even after living through those experiences that would have shattered men more skilled than he, Sam still found himself weighed down by an equally potent terror, knowledge. The fear that in his reading, in his discovering, he might find the truth too large, too dark, too impossible for his timid hands to shape. He had returned to the Citadel in Old Town with Gilly and the baby, determined to glean any knowledge that might bolster the realm's defenses against the looming threat in the north. But each turn of a page seemed to cast a heavier shadow upon him. He thought often of Jon Snow, of the battles sure to be waged when the White Walkers advanced, and how desperately the living needed answers. Sam read fervently by candlelight in cramped corners of the Citadel's libraries. Day after day, he lost himself in the dust-laden texts, in the scribes' cramped lettering, in the labyrinth of lost lore and half-myth. He cut the binding threads of volumes no one else thought to read, or dared to open for fear of curses and mold. They lay strewn around him, a dizzying nest of parchment and secrets. He was not alone, though. Gilly supported him in her steadfast way, even if she did not quite understand the labyrinthine preoccupation of his research. She would bring him bowls of stew, half the time growing cold upon some side table while Sam's eyes flicked from one ancient phrase to the next. Gilly served as both anchor and reminder of the life he was fighting to protect. She stayed in cramped quarters with the child, her footsteps echoing faintly in the corridors as she looked for Sam late at night when he forgot to come back and sleep. But often Sam was in the company of locked doors and secrets best left alone, or so the Archmaesters would have him think. Since the war with the White Walkers loomed, some of these Archmaesters, those who had read the Ravens from the north, who'd heard the stories of Sam's sojourn beyond the wall, remained skeptical that magic was the answer. But Sam had carried that Valyrian steel sword, that dragon-glass dagger, and he'd seen the eyes of the undead. He knew these foes were no ordinary wights. He scoured old scrolls for references to spells lost to time. For if the children of the forest had once had potent magic, was it not conceivable that the Citadel, with the wealth of knowledge from countless centuries, might hold some volume that could teach men a new way to stand against such an enemy? It was deep in the recesses of the oldest library tower that Sam found an account so old it nearly crumbled in his hands. He glimpsed mention of a shadow-bound text from Ashai, rumored to detail a rite that could repel the dead. The reference was only a footnote. Intrigued, Sam spent days searching for further mention, rummaging through each index of dusty catalogs. At last, in the Citadel's restricted vault, he uncovered a narrow codex bound in black leather with no title on the spine. The pages inside were brittle, their edges flaking to the touch. The language was an archaic dialect of High Valyrian mingled with something older. Sam's High Valyrian was passable, but this was different enough that it made the text as puzzling as a coded script. Yet the final lines, he could read well enough, made cold ripples run across his skin. Words of power may freeze a soul's passage from one world to the next, but at terrible cost to the living who dare speak them. Hunched in the lonely glow of a green-shaded lantern, Sam laid out scrap after scrap of vellum where he painstakingly transcribed each letter. Gilly would come in, place a hand on his shoulder and say softly, "Sam." He'd almost forget to look up, consumed by the revelation. There were references to death wards, incantations said to hold a spirit in place, and some form of channeling life force from the living to strengthen the barrier. A terrifying concept, terrifying, yet enticing. For if it meant giving men and women a fighting chance against those unstoppable White Walkers, how could he not pursue it? The nights in Old Town were mild compared to the north, but still Sam felt a chill settle into the library's corners, as though the text he read exhaled some supernatural frost that touched him. And though he struggled to understand all of it, he gleaned from the scattered lines that the spell required certain catalysts: a heart of obsidian, an endless flame, and the blood of one who'd stared into the face of death and emerged unbroken. That last portion made him tremble. It sounded so personal, so dangerous. He faced death, yes, but had he emerged unbroken? Time was fleeting. Already ravens spoke of skirmishes near the neck, sightings of whites in remote northern villages. Sam dreaded every message. The Citadel itself thrummed with quiet tension, the novices and acolytes speaking in hushed tones of the realm's chaos. And yet, many archmaesters only scoffed, more concerned with mundane politics and verifying lineages than truly believing that the legends from the north were real. Sam once more realized that if help was to come, it might rest on his own shoulders, and perhaps on that strange text. So he studied. He reread every line. He found references to illusions, wards, half-forgotten miracles. He had grown used to the dryness in his mouth, the blurriness in his eyes, as he poured himself into deciphering what might be the realm's best hope. After several days of feverish research, Sam discovered the codex contained instructions on forging a kind of amulet, a focus for protective magic. He read that the Magaiji from Essos sometimes used such vessels to direct spells. This conjured an unsettling memory of Melisandre, a red priestess who could do uncanny things with her magic. But her magic was fueled by the Lord of Light. The text Sam read spoke of a more neutral, if not older, magic, a raw channeling of life, unbound by any singular deity. He locked himself away with ink and parchment, scrawling out possible translations, cursing under his breath when he could make no sense of a certain phrase. For instance, the text kept referring to a frozen threshold that linked the realm of the living to the realm of the dead. The ritual described was meant to seal that threshold, or at least hamper the passage of whites. But the words were obscure, possibly metaphorical. He read out loud a verse about the luminous tears of night that must be harnessed. Could that be dragon glass? Sam had read it was formed from volcanic obsidian, the frozen fire. Or was it something more exotic, like the tears of Nymeria's fallen star from ancient legend? He might have floundered in confusion if not for one reference that rung with clarity. Black obsidian, dragon glass, was indeed referred to in the Valyrian dialect as frozen fire. That gave Sam hope. He took a precious piece of dragon glass from his satchel, one he'd kept from the north, and studied it under the lantern's glow. The incantation called for a forging of the stone into a heart shape, then binding it to a vessel of living flame. A brazier? A special candle? Sam recalled that the Citadel possessed glass candles, rumored to burn with magic. He'd seen one flickering weirdly once, though the archmaesters rarely admitted to such a phenomenon. Was that the endless flame the text mentioned? Nerves and excitement warred in his stomach. He needed help. Not from the archmaesters, who might dismiss him or confiscate the text. He needed someone who believed, who trusted that the threat was real, and who might be able to hold a needle or tongs with a steadier hand than Sam's trembling ones. His mind immediately went to an acolyte named Julius, a quiet, thoughtful young man who had once confided in Sam that he believed in many wonders. Julius had studied runic languages and even dabbled in forging. If Sam were to attempt to create a magical object from dragonglass, Julius might be the only ally in the Citadel bold enough to help. Under a cloak of secrecy, Sam approached Julius in the hour before dawn, in a lesser courtyard overshadowed by the tall spires of the Citadel. The gloom was thick, the smell of brine drifting in from the harbor. Sam felt the tension in his chest, the hush of his voice as he explained in clipped phrases what he intended to do. Julius' eyes, large and bright in the half-light, flickered with curiosity and dread. A blade from dragonglass, or a shaped piece. You want to melt it or chisel it, Sam, It's not easy. I know. Dragonglass can be shaped, but it's tricky. I think we need to shape it into something like a heart. That's what the text says. Sam's lips felt dry, and he glanced around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. Then we need an endless flame. The instructions mention a glass candle. Julius nodded slowly, though he looked pale. The glass candles are locked away in the ebony vault. The archmaesters keep them under watch. Are you sure we need one? We could attempt an ordinary flame. Sam rubbed his eyes. The exhaustion was seeping into his bones. It specifically says the flame must be a living flame that doesn't consume itself. I think that's a glass candle. I've seen one lit once. It burned with no wick. We have to try. Or else, the incantation might fail. Nair. Julius hesitated, then gave a firm nod. For the north, then. For all of Westeros. That first step would have been inconceivable to Sam if he'd still been the same boy who cowered in his father's hall. But war changed people, necessity changed people, and he felt a sense of purpose override his fear. The two men planned it all in hushed whispers, meeting in dim corners. Gilly alone knew what Sam intended, but even she didn't grasp the intricacies of the magic. She just watched him with worried eyes, her arms cradling the baby, and said, "Don't do anything too dangerous, Sam." He swallowed his guilt, for he knew he was going to do something very dangerous indeed. Sneaking into the ebony vault was no trivial matter. It required picking a lock or stealing a key from an absent-minded archmaster. Julius managed the key theft with nimble fingers while Sam kept watch. Each passing second felt like a year, the silence in the corridor so loud in his ears that Sam could have sworn the entire Citadel must hear his heart pounding. But at last Julius extracted a small iron key from the archmaster's belt as he slept in a reading nook, and the pair slunk away. They didn't speak until they were outside, in the cool night breeze, hearts pounding with adrenaline. They waited an hour, ensuring the archmaester would not awaken soon. Then, choosing a moment when only the distant steps of a night steward disturbed the corridors, they made for the ebony vault. The door was thick, blackened oak, bound in iron. Julius tried the key. The mechanism gave a reluctant click. By faint lantern light they slid inside. The ebony vault was a cramped room lined with shelves containing curious objects seldom touched. Dragon eggs rumored to be petrified, old glass candles, lumps of unidentified metal from across the sea, fragments of Valyrian steel, and other relics too precious or dangerous to be displayed. Sam's hand shook on the lantern. The hush was absolute. Each breath seemed to echo. There, in a corner, a row of tall greenish-black glass candles stood upright in protective holders. They shimmered with a faint luminescence even unlit. Julius set his jaw and gathered one carefully into a padded satchel. That one candle might be their key for forging a new line of defense against the dead. They needed flint to spark it, or perhaps a special incantation. Sam carefully tucked away a half-burnt parchment from the same shelf that described how to ignite glass candles. Then, they turned to leave. On the way out, Sam spotted something else that made his heart jump. A small chest, half buried behind a dusty candelabrum, labeled with old Valyrian script. He recognized the word for shadow. Swallowing, he opened it. Within lay half a dozen lumps of black stone, each swirling with hints of color. Dragonglass. He felt an urge to take at least one piece, to experiment with forging it. He reasoned the text insisted they needed more than just the piece Sam had. They might require enough to fashion an entire amulet or even an array of them. Without waiting for Julius' protest, he slipped a chunk of the black stone into his own bag. Then they left with hushed steps, hearts pounding, and retreated to Julius' tiny forging station in a rarely used wing of the Citadel. It took them 2 nights, by stealth, to shape the dragonglass into the form described in the text. Julius used a small furnace meant for forging metal links for chain collars. He discovered that dragonglass could be shaped if heated just right, and chipped carefully with specialized tools. Sam hovered, reciting the instructions he had painstakingly translated. The shape needed to resemble a heart but stylized with a hollow core. The hardest part was not the forging itself but doing so quietly, in near darkness, terrified that someone would discover them. Julius' face glistened with sweat from both fear and the furnace's heat, his shirt damp. Sam's own hands shook with each turn of the tongs, worried that a single misstep would mean the piece cracked or shattered, or that the archmaesters would catch them. Yet they persevered. Eventually, when dawn's first light threatened to color the sky, they finished. The piece of dragonglass had a dark, glossy sheen, shaped into a heart with a small hollow that could hold something. Blood, perhaps? Sam gingerly picked it up in a gloved hand. It pulsed in the lantern's glow, black with subtle hints of red swirling within. The text's next step insisted on submerging the piece in living flame while reciting an incantation of sealing. Sam, every nerve a-quiver, rummaged for the scrap that described how to ignite the glass candle. He found references to focusing Wuna's mind on the candle and speaking certain Valyrian words. He remembered reading that glass candles could be lit by someone with strong will, or magical affinity, or, some said, dragon's blood. Sam had none of these. Anxiety flared. Could Julius do it? Could Sam? They set the glass candle upright in a specially crafted stand, and Sam tried to recite the old words as best he could. The candle did nothing at first. He tried a second time, forcing conviction into each syllable. It flickered. A momentary green shimmer danced within, then died. Julius' eyes widened. He placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. Perhaps you need a sacrifice. The suggestion made Sam's blood run cold. He recalled how Melisandre had used royal blood for her spells. No, Sam said, voice trembling. We can't do that. Let me try again. Neandale. He closed his eyes and pictured everything he'd seen beyond the wall. The darkness, the undead. He remembered that moment he slew a white walker with a shard of dragon glass, the primal terror and triumph. He summoned that memory, that raw will to survive, and spoke the incantation again, focusing on the candle's hidden flame. He felt a surge of something, a quivering in his gut, the hairs on his arms standing on end. When he opened his eyes, a faint green glow emanated from within the glass. Julius exhaled shakily. The candle was lit, though the flame was invisible, more a ghostly light than fire. But the text had said an eternal flame need not burn in the usual sense. They hurried then, placing the dragonglass heart within that glow, as the text dictated. Sam opened the codex to the correct page, and Julius braced the heart with a metal rod. Sam read the incantation in a stilted, trembling voice, uncertain of the exact pronunciation. The words slipped over his tongue, half High Valerian, half something else. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The candle's glow intensified, the black glass gleaming like a polished demon in the lantern light. Sam felt something stir in the air, a presence, a weight, as if the very space around them were thickening. A swirl of greenish luminance spiraled around the dragonglass heart, and Sam smelled something like cold iron and sulfur all at once. He poured his raw intent into the words, "Let the threshold be sealed. Let the dead remain beyond. Let the living be free." It was a fumbling incantation, gleaned from various half-translated lines, but Sam prayed it would hold some power. As he spoke the final word, the green luminescence snapped into the heart's hollow core. A pulse of faint, cold wind rushed through the forging station, extinguishing their lantern flame. Julius cursed as the darkness swallowed them. But the glass candle remained lit, and they both saw that the dragonglass heart pulsed with an inner glow like a banked ember. Sam held his breath, waiting for the next step. Nothing exploded or shattered. The candle's glow stabilized. An eerie hush followed, as though the entire world held its breath. Sam reached out a trembling hand and touched the dragonglass. It felt oddly warm, yet the warmth was not scalding. He lifted it, that impossible black heart, and felt it thrum like a living thing. Julius let out a shaky laugh. "7, save us," he whispered. "You've done it, Sam." Sam wasn't sure what it was yet. If he'd truly forged an amulet that could repel the dead, or if he'd merely performed some silly old incantation. But he felt a swirling sense of possibility. He needed to test it. Not in the Citadel, of course. That was impossible. But perhaps there was a rumor of whites lurking in the region? He dreaded the idea. The others might not have reached the reach, but he'd heard stray tales of corpses missing from crypts, of travelers disappearing. Then again, he realized he might not have to test it on an actual white to confirm it had power. The text had mentioned that the artifact would radiate an aura deadly to the dead, but draining to the living who wielded it. That last part gave him pause. Was it draining him now? The next morning, Sam carefully hid the black heart in a plain wooden box, burying it under a false bottom in his trunk. It was all he could do until he decided on a plan. Julius parted ways with him, instructing Sam to handle the artifact carefully. They could not keep the stolen glass candle forever. Soon the Archmaester who'd lost his key might discover the theft. And if they discovered Sam had stolen an invaluable artifact, no doubt he'd be cast out or worse. Sam realized that soon he might have to flee the Citadel with his creation, or else risk losing it. But he needed more knowledge from the Codex. The final pages might hold instructions on how to unleash the amulet's full potential. That day, Sam walked the corridors of the Citadel with sweaty palms. He avoided eye contact, certain that every passing maester could see guilt shining in his eyes like a mirror. Twice, he thought he saw Archmaester Ambrose eyeing him suspiciously. Gilly sensed his agitation and tried to calm him, but Sam could scarcely eat, scarcely sleep. He had the amulet. He had the codex. But was that enough to truly help Jon Snow, to help the living push back the tide of the dead? Late that night, Sam returned to the library's restricted section to glean more from the Black Codex. He read, "The amulet must be awakened with living blood. The incantation's power extends from the one who willingly offers the life force. The cost is paid each time the artifact is used." The words soared off the page. Living blood. Sam felt dread coil in his gut. A sacrifice, or at least a blood offering. He thought of Gilly, of the baby, and cold sweat slicked his brow. Did he dare perform such a ritual on himself? The text implied it was not necessarily lethal, but draining. If the amulet was used to repel an entire army of the dead, how much blood, how much life would it require? Sam's mind churned. Perhaps a few drops would suffice. Maybe the text exaggerated. He couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain. The artifact's power hinged on living energy. Magic always exacted a price. He whispered the words in the quiet of the library, thinking of the heroes of old, the children of the forest forging wards. Could it be that they too had shed their own blood to stop the White Walkers, all those centuries ago? In the days that followed, Sam made preparations. He told Gilly they would have to leave the Citadel soon. She accepted it with a resigned nod. After all, Sam had never intended to remain a Maester novice forever. The war in the north demanded action. Julius offered to help them slip out quietly, forging some travel documents so the city guard wouldn't question them. Sam planned to travel to Winterfell, to rejoin Jon Snow, or whomever remained to lead the fight against the dead. He penned a letter to Jon, though he didn't know if it would reach him in time, and decided to carry it himself. However, the theft of the glass candle did not go unnoticed for long. On the third morning, Sam overheard Archmaester Ambrose and Archmaester Marwyn whispering in urgent tones about the missing artifact, the ebony vault, and the rumor that someone had been forging with dragon glass in a hidden station. Terror hammered in Sam's chest. He hurried back to the novice's dormitory, found Julius huddled there. Julius' face was blanched. "They questioned me. I denied everything, but I don't know how long we can hide." That decided it. Sam and Gilly would leave that very night, Julius forging official documents that said they had urgent business in King's Landing. Sam swallowed past the lump in his throat. "What about you, Julius?" "I'll hold them off or at least mislead them. Maesters seldom suspect that the timid ones among us can do great mischief." Julius gave a wan smile. "Take care, Sam, and if you truly manage to use that black heart, give the dead one hell of a greeting from the Citadel." They clasped forearms, the hush between them heavy with unspoken gratitude. That night, Gilly gathered what few possessions they had. Sam took the wooden box containing the heart, the codex, and a few scrolls. Under cover of darkness, they slipped out of the Citadel's back gate, forging ahead into the labyrinthine streets of Old Town. The baby fussed. Gilly hushed him softly, and Sam's heart pounded with each step as though a ring of watchers stood around every corner, waiting to denounce him. They boarded a small merchant ship heading up the Mander, traveling inland to Highgarden first, then planning to make their way north by roads or rivers. Sam had little coin, but enough to secure passage. On deck, as the city lights faded behind them, Sam closed his eyes and exhaled. He wondered if he'd ever see the Citadel again. The stolen candle weighed on his conscience, yet the realm's survival was at stake. That knowledge steadied him. The journey upriver was uneventful, though Sam kept to himself, worried that at any moment the ship might be searched by men from the Citadel. But no one came. Their fellow passengers were mostly farmers and small merchants traveling to trade. Some spoke of war, of the troubles in the north. Others shared wild rumors about whites in the night. Gilly clung close to Sam. Each day, Sam tried to study the codex discreetly. He was not sure how best to use the amulet in an actual battle, or if it would even function as the text promised. But every line he reread hinted at unimaginable possibility and unimaginable risk. In Highgarden, the scents of roses and summer fields felt jarringly peaceful compared to the horrors they knew lurked farther north. Sam and Gilly stayed just one day, using what coin they had left to purchase a mule and some supplies for the long road. Sam soon found that traveling under the hot sun, with dust clinging to his clothes, was strangely comforting compared to the stifling tension of the Citadel. Yet the stench of war was in the air too. Refugees from smaller northern fiefdoms trickled south, muttering of rumored attacks. Sam gleaned that no one truly believed in White Walkers in these parts, but they believed in winter-born troubles, in an unstoppable threat rumored to be marching behind the lines of a broken night's watch. As they pressed onward into the Riverlands, Sam's doubts began to mount. The road was harder than he'd anticipated. The baby cried often, and Gilly grew tired. Sam's legs ached from riding the stubborn mule. He worried that they were moving too slowly, that by the time he arrived with his amulet, the war would already be lost. Or that the amulet wouldn't do any good. He tried to remind himself that knowledge was power, that every small advantage could save lives, and that the final lines in that codex might yet ring with truth. But it was difficult to keep hope. He'd see the fear in the farmer's eyes, see how ravens soared overhead as though scouting for carrion. He dreaded each new rumor about the undead, sightings of whites near Moat Cailin, houses gutted and found empty in the night. One late afternoon, about a fortnight into their journey, they took shelter in a half-ruined inn. The Riverlands had seen violence from earlier wars, and this place had not fully recovered. The roof leaked, and half the courtyard had collapsed into a shallow pond. The innkeeper, a grim man with scars across his brow, looked them over suspiciously. Sam told him they were traveling to see family in the north. The innkeeper shrugged, took their coin, and showed them to a drafty room upstairs. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters, Sam decided to test the amulet just a bit more. Gilly had fallen asleep with the baby in her arms, exhaustion etched on her face. Sam carefully rose and unlatched the wooden box. The black heart glimmered faintly in the moonlight. He pressed it against his chest, feeling a mild warmth. He whispered the incantation, the partial lines about protection, about the threshold of life and death. He felt his heartbeat quicken. A faint glow stirred in the stone. For an instant, he thought he saw shapes flickering in the corners of the room, like ephemeral silhouettes. Then the glow ebbed. He felt a sharp dizziness, a sudden weakness in his limbs. He nearly dropped the heart. Panting, he set it back in the box. So it demanded his life force, or at least some measure of it to function. But if it could ward off the living dead, was that cost worth it? He drifted into uneasy sleep. In his dreams he saw hordes of whites, eyes pale blue, an ocean of the dead. He stood alone on a battlefield, clutching the black heart as a swirl of necrotic wind battered him. Each incantation he spoke drove them back, but with every word he felt himself aging, weakening. Finally, the wind took him, and he woke in a cold sweat, heart hammering. Gilly stirred. "Sam?" He lay panting, forced a reassuring pat on her shoulder. Sleep did not come easily after that. They continued north, forging through the chaos of the war-torn roads. Days blurred. Gilly and Sam subsisted on stale bread, salt pork, and the occasional vegetable gleaned from abandoned fields. Word reached them that the Night King's forces were on the move, that entire towns in the north had gone silent. The chill of autumn deepened, and each night Sam found himself bundling Gilly and the child in every scrap of cloth they had. The air seemed to smell of impending doom. At last, after many weary weeks, they came within sight of Winterfell. The fortress loomed over the plains, gray and austere, with banners whipping in the cold wind. Sam almost wept with relief at the familiarity of it. But the place looked battered. The gates were partially reinforced with new timber, and the courtyard bustled with men, women, and children, preparing for another siege. War had come and gone, and might come again at any moment. Sam identified himself at the gate, was recognized by some of the men of the Night's Watch, who remembered him from Castle Black. They led him inside, to an antechamber where the bustle was thick. Soldiers with bandaged arms, blacksmiths hammering out new weapons, small folk cowering in corners. The entire fortress felt on edge. Sam's heart sank. This was no place of comfort. This was the last stand of the living. A steward recognized Sam and ushered him toward the great hall. The corridors were packed with men in boiled leather, women with steeled expressions, a sense that any moment the alarm could sound. When Sam finally stepped into the hall, he found Sansa Stark conferring with several northern lords at a long table. She looked thinner than he remembered, but her bearing was regal. Her red hair pinned back in a no-nonsense style. Beside her stood Brienne of Tarth, tall and watchful, and across the table was Davos Seaworth, his face etched with lines of worry. They all turned as Sam approached, stumbling slightly, exhaustion bowing his shoulders. "Samwell Tarly," said Sansa, voice subdued but tinged with relief. "We feared the worst. Where is Jon? Did you travel with him?" Sam shook his head, breath catching. "No, my lady. I came from Old Town with Gilly." He gestured helplessly. "I don't know where Jon is, but I hope to find him. He might be with the armies to the north, or perhaps east. I've heard rumors." Sansa's lips formed a tight line. "Jon went to the front lines near the Dreadfort. We've had no word from him in days, but we have to hope he still holds the line." She took a breath. "I'm glad you're here, Sam. We need all the help we can get." Sam nodded, swallowing the dryness in his mouth. I've brought something. Knowledge, maybe a weapon. The Citadel has volumes, old spells. I think I found a way to fight the dead. I've seen it work on a small scale, but I need to speak with someone who can organize a real test." Davos and Brienne exchanged glances. Sansa closed her eyes briefly. "Tell me, Sam. We have scouts who return describing horrors nightly. If you know something, speak quickly. We're running short of time. The White Walkers are massing beyond the last river." Sam, trying to steady his voice, explained the gist of it. He told them of the Dragonglass Heart, an artifact that might ward off or freeze the dead's advance. He tried to keep the more gruesome details of the blood price to himself, uncertain how best to phrase it. Sansa's eyes lit with a flicker of hope, but Davos looked skeptical. "A bit of black glass and a few words? We have entire wagons of dragonglass weapons, from Dragonstone. None of it has turned the tide. We kill a few whites, and more come. We kill a White Walker or two, but the army remains an ocean. Will your amulet do more than any arrow or blade can?" "Nani." Sam exhaled. "It's not an ordinary weapon, Sir Davos. It's a barrier, a ward. The text suggests it can stop the dead from crossing a threshold of the wielder's making, like a magical wall, albeit smaller, if we placed it in a strategic location." His voice stammered. "It could buy time, at least. Force the dead to find another route, or perhaps if done on a large enough scale, it might pen them in." "Nah." Sansa nodded slowly. "Time is what we need. The armies are exhausted. Winter is bearing down. If you believe it might work, Sam, we must try." Davos rubbed his stubbled jaw. "Even if it's half effective, that's better than nothing. My lady, we can't pin all our hopes on it, but I've learned to trust Sam's mind." Brienne silently agreed with a grave nod. And so it was decided that Sam would demonstrate this artifact's power in the Godswood that very night. They would gather a handful of watchers, and if the results proved genuine, they'd attempt to replicate the effect near the front lines. Sam's stomach knotted. He remembered the text's warnings. He remembered the surge of weakness he'd felt. But there was no turning back now. The moon was high, silvery light bathing the sacred heart tree in the Godswood. Snow dusted the ground in patches. Brienne and Davos stood nearby, as well as a handful of soldiers and Gilly, who looked more nervous than ever. She clutched the baby, her eyes flicking from Sam to the onlookers. Sansa was absent. She had responsibilities that called her away, but she delegated Brienne as her proxy. Sam stepped forward, the wooden box in his arms, breath steaming in the cold air. "If there was a white or undead creature, I could more easily prove its effect," he said softly. "But I'll have to do my best to show you it can create a protective barrier." He lifted the black heart from the box. It gleamed, almost hungry for the night. Sam closed his eyes, summoning the incantation. He murmured the lines in Valyrian, then carefully pricked his own thumb with a small knife, letting a bead of blood well on his skin. The watchers whispered among themselves. Sam pressed the droplet of blood against the hollow of the heart. A faint hiss sounded, like the sizzle of raindrops on hot stone. Immediately the amulet began to glow with a pallid, shifting light, so subtle it was like watching moonlight ripple across a frozen lake. The air shifted. Davos stepped back, Uneasy. Brienne's gloved hand tightened on her sword hilt. Sam then spoke the words that named the threshold. None who are dead may cross. As I live, so I bar the way. His voice trembled. A swirl of cold wind ruffled the branches overhead. The watchers felt a sudden pressure, a sense of something intangible forming an invisible barrier around Sam. He took a step forward, focusing on an imaginary line in the snow. He saw frost forming on the ground, an outline of sorts, shining faintly in the moonlight. Brienne, tall and bold, tested that line, stepping forward. She passed easily, for she was living. But Sam explained that if a white approached, it would meet an invisible force. I only have so much stamina, Sam said, voice tight, but theoretically if I remain conscious, the whites cannot pass. He let the incantation fade. His breathing came fast, his head pounded. He felt that same draining sensation, as if a piece of his own life force had seeped into the amulet. But in the hush that followed, he saw the flicker of awe in some watcher's eyes. If that barrier could be amplified, it might be the difference between life and death in a tight choke point, a gate, a narrow pass. Davos looked shaken. 7 save us, he whispered. That's something. Brienne sheathed her sword. If we could place you, Sam, at a critical juncture, like the main gate, when the undead come, you might hold them back. But for how long? You look pale. Sam wiped sweat from his brow, though the air was freezing. It drains me. The Codex suggests I might channel the life force of others who volunteer. But that's dangerous. One slip, and it might kill them. Nah. Davos shook his head. I doubt we'll find many volunteers for that. As is, though, this is invaluable. A single man with that amulet might hold a narrow pass. My concern is that an army of the dead will simply swarm around you. Unless we trap them, Brienne said quietly. Build a funnel or a corridor. Force them to approach only from one direction. Then Sam can bar the path. Meanwhile, our archers and soldiers can attack from the flanks. If it buys us time to kill their white walkers, the whites might fall. Or... It was a bold plan, but in desperate times, boldness was often all they had. They decided to try it near the Dreadfort, where the castle's outer moat and walls might channel the dead into a causeway. Sam felt his heart stutter. The Dreadfort was no place for comfort, but it was a formidable fortress if used correctly. He feared what might happen if the plan failed. If the barrier collapsed under the unyielding assault of the dead, then Sam's life force might be consumed by the amulet in the process. But he forced a nod. This might be the best chance. Maybe Jon Snow was still up there fighting. Sam prayed he'd find him alive. Preparations were swift. The men at Winterfell who were well enough to march hurriedly assembled. Sansa remained behind to defend Winterfell, sending Brienne, Davos, and a contingent of soldiers to the Dreadfort. Sam insisted that Gilly remain in Winterfell for safety. She argued, tears in her eyes, that she wanted to stay by his side, but Sam refused. He couldn't risk their child's life. Reluctantly, Gilly agreed. They parted in the courtyard with a desperate embrace, Gilly pressing a small token of bone into Sam's hand, a little figure shaped like a mother and child. Come back, she whispered. We need you. Sam felt tears well, but he only nodded, hugging her gently. Then he mounted his borrowed horse, the black heart amulet tucked close to his chest, the codex in his satchel. He followed Brienne and Davos into the cold wind and swirling snow. A band of 100 men marched with them, joined by a ragged group of cavalry from the Vale. They trudged for days across the icy fields, the north's harshness biting their faces. At night, they huddled around small fires. Sam was given a spot near the center, well guarded, since he was too valuable to lose. Brienne insisted he sleep, but each night nightmares plagued him, visions of an unending tide of rotting hands clawing at him. At last, they reached the outskirts of the Dreadfort. The castle's silhouette rose black against a snow-filled sky. The surrounding lands were scarred by conflict, burnt-out villages and frozen corpses half buried in drifts. Sam's stomach churned at the sight of them. The stench of death lingered in the crisp air. They found the gates open, manned by a skeleton force of Bolton men who had since pledged to the Starks or simply deserted. The castle's walls were thick, studded with iron spikes. Sam had never been to the Dreadfort before, but he'd heard vile tales of its dungeons and the cruelty of House Bolton. Now it stood as a battered stronghold, its past overshadowed by the present threat. The men in charge recognized Davos, or at least his herald. They allowed them in, grateful for reinforcements. Sam soon discovered that Jon Snow had indeed been there but left for the front lines to repel a White Walker vanguard. They didn't know if he still lived. Sam tried not to let despair consume him. He needed to focus on the plan. The causeway leading to the Dreadfort's main gate was the only easy approach from the north, flanked by an icy river and a steep embankment. If the undead marched from that direction, they'd funnel through. Perfect for Sam's barrier. But it meant Sam needed to stand out in the open, or near enough to block them. Everyone recognized the risk, but Sam was resolute. He had to see this through. That night, they prepared. The men dug pitfalls, set up barricades, placed archers on the walls. Sam studied the codex by torchlight, ignoring the clammy sweat on his skin. He read instructions for sustaining the incantation by storing some of one's blood in the amulet. The text was cryptic. He bit his lip, eventually deciding it might be prudent to place more than a few drops. If he collapsed in mid-battle, the barrier would fail. The codex implied that with enough blood pre-offered, the amulet could sustain a barrier for a short time even if Sam faltered. Fear coiled in him. Still, it might save lives. So before dawn, in the dim shadow of the castle courtyard, Sam did something that made his knees shake. He took a small blade, pricked a vein in his forearm, and let a thin stream of blood drip into the hollow core of the black heart. The amulet drank it up, glowing faintly. Sam felt dizzy but pressed on, whispering the incantation. The stones seemed to pulse, satisfied, then dimmed again. He swayed on his feet. Brienne, who had come to check on him, rushed to his side. "What are you doing?" she demanded, seeing the blood. Sam managed a wan smile. "Strengthening the barrier. I'll be fine." But he felt so cold, so weary. Davos arrived soon after. "Our scouts report movement in the distance," he murmured grimly. "The dead approach, perhaps 1,000 strong with a White Walker at their head. If they come by the causeway, we'll see them at midday." Midday came, and with it, the hush of an impending storm. The sky was gray, the wind sharp. Sam stood on the causeway, flanked by a pair of watchful knights. The black heart amulet hung around his neck, tucked beneath his furs to hide its glow. The men behind him formed ranks along the fortress walls, arrows notched, swords drawn. And then they saw it, a dark mass moving across the field, shapes that shambled, some that lurched with unnatural speed. Wights, dozens, then hundreds, an army of them, skin pale and torn, eyes glowing with that terrible cold light. At their rear, a tall figure in ice blue armor, face calm and malevolent. A White Walker. Sam's breath caught. He remembered the first time he'd killed one, but that was with a stroke of dragon glass. Could he banish an entire legion? His throat felt parched. He clutched the amulet, pressing it to his chest. The White Walker in the distance seemed to sense him, leveling a glare that felt like shards of ice piercing Sam's spirit. He heard the rattle of bones and frozen limbs as the whites advanced. "Now, Sam," Brienne urged softly from behind him. Sam began the incantation. His voice trembled but grew stronger with each syllable. The old Valyrian words cracked through the icy air. The black heart felt alive, heating against his chest. As he raised his free hand, he pictured the threshold forming in front of him, an invisible wall that would bar the undead from crossing. He felt the pull on his blood, the surge of magic swirling. He nearly fainted as a gust of wind whirled around him, scattering snow. Then, the whites reached the threshold, and reeled back as though struck by a physical force. Some stumbled, others clawed at the air. A wave of them pressed forward, but they could not cross. Sam, eyes wide, watched the undead thrash against nothing, jaws gnashing. A tide of lifeless bodies piling up, yet unable to pass an invisible line not 10 yards from where he stood. A murmur of awe rippled through the defenders. Arrows whistled from the walls, cutting down some of the whites. But they were many, and every second brought fresh press from behind. The White Walker strode closer, gaze fixed on Sam. It raised a pale blade, pointing it at him. Sam felt fear coil in his bowels. The Codex had warned that the incantations might falter if the caster lost focus or if the White Walkers enacted their own sorcery. He gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on the black heart. The whites pressed again, an even greater wave. The barrier shimmered under the force of their assault. Sam cried out, feeling a searing pain in his chest. He tasted iron on his tongue. More blood. The amulet was draining him. Brienne was shouting something, Davos as well, but Sam couldn't hear them over the roar in his ears. The world blurred. He forced his trembling knees to lock in place. He repeated the incantation, voice breaking. The White Walker advanced even closer, until it stood at the threshold itself, a mere few yards from Sam. Its cold eyes bored into Sam's. Slowly, it raised its icy sword, and Sam felt a wave of frost emanate from it. The barrier shuddered. The amulet flared. Sam's own breath fogged and froze on his beard. He wanted to drop to his knees, to close his eyes and slip into blackness. But he couldn't. If he faltered, the barrier would fail, and the whites would flood in. Behind the White Walker, the undead were being peppered with arrows from the walls. Dozens fell, but dozens more came. The watchers on the fortress cheered Sam's name, seeing that the line held. He tried to cling to that encouragement, letting it feed his resolve. He conjured the memory of Gilly, the baby, of Jean's determined face, of all he held dear. He roared the incantation's final lines. The White Walker swung its sword in a lethal arc, aiming to shatter Sam's barrier. A deafening crack resounded. Sam reeled, feeling the blow as if he'd been struck across the head. He staggered. Blood trickled from his nose. The barrier flickered. He forced the last vestiges of strength into it. Then came a clarion cry from the left. Another wave of cavalry, northern bannermen, charged in from behind the White Walker, their lances glinting with dragonglass tips. They slammed into the undead flank. For a moment, the White Walker was distracted, turning to meet the new threat. Sam's barrier still stood, though trembling on the brink of collapse. He knew this was the moment. The defenders from the fortress poured out from behind him in a wedge formation, flanking the whites pinned between Sam's invisible wall and the cavalry's charge. They hacked at the dead, sending heads rolling, bodies collapsing. The White Walker hissed, turning this way and that, trapped in the chaos of living attackers on three sides. Sam dropped to one knee, chest heaving, yet he kept a shaky hand aloft, maintaining the barrier so the whites could not flee forward. For several heart-pounding minutes, the living methodically cut down the whites, or pinned them with spears so that archers could shoot them with dragonglass arrows. The White Walker fought fiercely, freezing men's swords, cutting down three in quick succession. But a fourth cavalryman rode up behind it, thrusting a dragonglass-tipped lance into its side. The White Walker screeched, stumbling as cracks of ice spread across its body. Then, with a final blow from a Northman wielding a Valyrian steel sword, it shattered into a million icy shards, scattering into the wind. As soon as the White Walker dissolved, the remaining whites stiffened. Their glowing eyes flickered. Some collapsed outright, some stood immobile. The battle was won. Sam, his vision swimming, released the barrier. The black heart amulet dulled. He slumped forward, retching. Brienne ran to him, catching him before he fell on his face in the snow. "Sam!" she called, alarmed. He tried to speak, but darkness swallowed him. His last sensation was the swirl of victory cries around him. He awoke in the Dreadfort's great hall, lying on a makeshift pallet. Torches flickered overhead, and he felt numbness in his limbs. Davos knelt beside him, pressing a cup of hot wine to his lips. "Easy there," said the knight softly. "You've done well, Sam. The whites are gone. At least for now." Sam's throat burned. He sipped, coughed, tried to lift his head. We won?" His voice sounded weak. Davos smiled, a weary line on his weathered face. That we did. Thanks to your barrier, we routed the undead. They'll not approach this way again soon. Might be we turned the tide." He lowered his gaze. "Lost a fair number of good men, but it could have been worse, much worse." Sam forced a nod, relief flooding him. Then he winced, a sharp pang in his chest. He looked down. The black heart amulet lay on a small table next to him. It looked inert, but still ominous. "The cost," he whispered. "Is it always going to be like that?" Brienne approached, arms folded. "We're not going to ask you to do it again tomorrow if that's what you fear. But Sam, your barrier saved us. Word of this victory is spreading. The White Walkers aren't unstoppable. With your help, the living can hold them." Sam gazed at the amulet, heart heavy. He wondered how many times he could do this, how many times he could pour his own lifeblood into that black heart to hold the line. And yet, seeing the gratitude in Brienne's eyes, in Davos' gentle smile, he knew he would do it as many times as it took. The realm needed every advantage. While he lived, while breath remained in his body, he would use the knowledge gleaned from the Citadel to shield the realm from the dead. By the next day, a new urgency gripped the defenders. Scouts brought rumors that the main host of the White Walkers was still at large, led by none other than the Night King. They were far in the north, locked in skirmishes with the combined forces of the living who had marched under Jon Snow. Sam recognized that this victory at the Dreadfort was but a single brushstroke in a much larger canvas. But it was a brushstroke of hope, a sign that magic could be used effectively against the White Walkers on a battlefield scale. Brienne, Davos, and the Dreadfort's new commander decided to fortify their position and send a raven to Winterfell. Perhaps if they amassed enough troops they could mount a coordinated defense at another strategic choke point, relying on Sam's barrier again. Sam could only pray that he'd be strong enough to conjure it. He asked for more time to research the Codex's final pages. Perhaps there was a clue on how to amplify the barrier without draining him entirely. For days, Sam recuperated in the castle's old maester's tower, flipping through the Codex with shaking hands. The moans of the wounded seeped through the walls. Outside, the howling wind brought fresh snow. He read accounts of Esosai sorcerers using linked amulets, distributing the burden among several casters. If Sam could replicate that, perhaps half a dozen volunteers could share the cost. Yet forging additional black hearts would require more stolen glass candles, more knowledge that Sam didn't fully possess. He cursed the limitations. The single candle from the Citadel was hidden in the baggage train, guarded carefully. Sam doubted he could replicate the forging process out here, not without someone like Julius, not without the forging station or the knowledge locked in Old Town's restricted vaults. Still, he kept reading, searching for a more immediate solution. Late one night, alone in the flickering light of a brazier, he stumbled across a mention of synergy with dragonfire. Where a living flame meets living stone, the threshold extends. Sam's eyes lit up. Dragonfire. He remembered the rumors that Daenerys Targaryen had once brought dragons to these shores. He wasn't sure if any dragons still lived, but if they did, combining that fire with his barrier might create a wide arc of protection, or some devastating new effect. He pictured a ring of dragonfire meeting the amulet's invisible wall, forging an impenetrable circle. Then again, the text was vague. It might do nothing, or it might kill him in the process. By the next dawn, Sam was well enough to walk the walls. He beheld the aftermath of battle, the half-frozen corpses of whites that had not yet disintegrated, men piling them onto pyres. Smoke drifted into the pale sky. Brienne joined him. "Any progress in those old pages?" she asked softly. "Some references, but no certain path," Sam admitted. "I need more resources, more time. The war doesn't allow for that." Brienne gazed across the killing field. "You gave us hope, Sam. That's more than we had before. Even if you can do this only a few more times, it might turn the tide in critical battles." Sam swallowed, pushing aside the dread of it. "We should find Jon Snow. He's the heart of this fight, and I need to tell him what I learned, if he's with the main army." He trailed off. The unspoken question haunted them. Was Jon still alive? They decided to send scouts to locate Jon. The rest would remain at the Dreadfort, fortifying. Over the next few days, the castle's defenders improved their positions, burying pitfalls, forging dragon glass weapons. Sam aided where he could, though he was no fighter, mostly offering counsel on how to handle the whites. He also tried to teach a few chosen men some rudimentary lines of the incantation, in case he was incapacitated. Whether they would succeed, he couldn't be sure. When the scouts returned, they brought news that Jon Snow had been sighted near the last hearth, engaged in a desperate struggle. Thousands of whites were besieging the battered fortress. The scouts said it might fall within days. Sam's eyes widened. "Then we have to go," he insisted. "We can't let Jon face that alone. This might be the final stand." Brienne looked at Davos, and Davos sighed. We must try. We'll muster every able man. The dread fort can spare perhaps 300. It's not much, but if we ride hard, we might reach the last hearth in time to help. They departed at first light, a grim cavalry riding beneath a dark sky. Sam braced himself for another exhausting journey, but urgency spurred them onward. The roads were perilous with ice and drifting snow. At night, they huddled in quickly pitched tents. Sam felt a gnawing fear in his belly, thinking that each day they tarried, the undead advanced further. But they pressed on. On the 5th day, they reached the outskirts of the last hearth. The sight made Sam's blood run cold. The castle was besieged, half its walls collapsed, the land around it strewn with the half-buried remains of wights. Within the courtyard, a battered host of men still fought, the tattered banners of House Umber and House Stark snapping in the wind. Direwolf sigils. And on the ramparts, Sam glimpsed a tall figure in black, Jon Snow, alive, swinging a sword that glinted Valyrian steel in the pale light, cutting down wights that clambered up from scaling ladders. The castle gates were broken, the undead flooding in. Sam's heart pounded. Brienne wasted no time. She led the cavalry forward, plunging into the flank of the undead horde. Davos raised a rallying cry. Arrows flew from Sam's men, each tipped with dragon glass. Sam, clutching the black heart, realized he might again turn the tide with a well-placed barrier. But the scale was immense, more than at the Dreadfort. Thousands of wights roiled across the field. A tall white walker in ice-crusted armor directed them with chilling authority. Sam's knees shook. Could he hold a barrier large enough to seal the broken gate? He had no choice. He dismounted, shaky on his feet, ignoring Brienne's calls to stay in safety. He had to be near the breach if he was to block it. He hurried forward, stumbling over corpses. Wights lurched around him. A soldier with a dragonglass pike guarded Sam, stabbing any undead that approached. Sam cradled the amulet. It felt hungry, heavier than ever. Hold them off, he rasped to the soldier, voice trembling. Then he forced himself to speak the incantation. Blood pounded in his ears. He drew his dagger and slashed a shallow cut across his palm, pressing it to the black heart. The glow intensified. He chanted, voice hoarse, half lost in the roar of battle. Again that swirling gust of unnatural wind whipped around him. The wights at the gate reeled back, some crumbling under the force. Others crowded behind them, clawing and screeching. Sam advanced, step by agonizing step, pushing the barrier deeper into the broken gate. If he could seal it, the men inside the castle would have a chance to regroup, to reinforce from above. He felt the amulet devouring his strength. The edges of his vision darkened. The White Walker on the field saw him, directed more wights his way. They crashed against the invisible line, piling up. Sam's legs shook. He felt a creeping numbness. But he maintained his focus. Inside the castle courtyard he saw Jon Snow, recognized the set of his shoulders, the fierce determination in his eyes as he glanced over and recognized Sam. Jon shouted something. Sam thought it might be his name, but Sam could hardly hear. Wights tried to climb the rubble, to go around the barrier, but archers from the castle walls picked them off. Some scaled the battered ramparts only to be met by Jon's sword. The White Walker advanced in a wide arc, aiming to flank Sam. Brienne rode to intercept, her sword glimmering. The clash was brutal, the White Walker's blade sending shards of frost flying. But Brienne was unstoppable. She thrust with a Valyrian steel dagger, forcing it back step by step. Then Davos arrived with a small group, harrying it from the side. Sam couldn't spare more than a glance, or the barrier would fail. The wights at the gate howled, unable to cross. Sam saw them piling up, thrashing. Men inside the gate rained dragonglass spears down, cutting them down in droves. Slowly, the push of undead receded. The cavalry around the castle's perimeter hacked and burned any pockets of wights that tried to regroup. Sam's barrier had effectively sealed the gap. Jon, with a handful of fighters, cleared the courtyard. The White Walker, pressed by Brienne and Davos, attempted to retreat, only to be skewered by a volley of dragonglass-tipped arrows. It let out a piercing shriek, then burst into icy shards. The tide turned in minutes. Sam's vision was blurring. He realized the immediate threat was gone. Shivering, he released the barrier, letting the amulet's glow fade. He collapsed to his knees, breath ragged, the black heart clattering to the stone. Vaguely he heard men cheering, the clang of swords. Through his haze he saw a figure dash toward him, kneeling, gripping his shoulders. He blinked. It was Jon Snow, face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes wide with concern. "Sam," Jon breathed. "What have you done to yourself?" Sam tried to smile, but everything spun. "Magic, from the Citadel," he mumbled. I promised I'd help." Then he slipped into unconsciousness. When next he woke, he was inside the battered great hall of the last hearth. Fires crackled in braziers. Men bustled about treating the wounded. Jon Snow stood nearby, conferring with Brienne, Davos, and a few others. Sam could barely push himself upright. Pain flared in every muscle. But the moment Jon saw him stirring, he hurried over, kneeling at Sam's side. "Gods, you look pale. You nearly killed yourself out there," he said, voice tight with concern. Sam swallowed, forcing himself to speak. "The amulet works. Stolen from the Citadel, forged with a glass candle. It can hold back the dead," he coughed, a raw ache in his chest. "But it takes, from me, from my lifeblood." Jon's expression was somber but also grateful. "Without it, we'd have lost the last hearth. We're in your debt." He glanced at the black heart resting on a table, faintly pulsing. "That is a powerful piece of magic." Sam nodded, tears burning in his eyes. "Jon, we might do it again, but I don't know how many times I can survive. And the Night King is still out there?" Jon looked grim. "We've sent word to Winterfell. We're gathering all remaining forces. The final battle is coming. If you can do this barrier once more, maybe twice, it might be enough to tilt the balance. But I can't ask you to sacrifice your life, Sam." Sam managed a weak smile. "You don't have to ask. I'd do anything to protect the realm, to protect Gilly, and you're the only king I've ever chosen." Jon's eyes shone with emotion. He placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. "You're as brave as any man I've known." Sam felt warmth in that moment, despite the cold surroundings. He realized that, in the end, he had moved beyond the label of coward that his father had placed on him so long ago. But the night was still dark, the final confrontation still ahead. Sam closed his eyes, resting for the battles to come. He knew that once, he'd been a timid boy who cowered in fear. Now he was Samwell Tarly, the unlikely wielder of an ancient magic that could hold death itself at bay. His journey had led him from the quiet corners of the Citadel's library to the very front lines of a war for the living. And though the cost was steep, though he trembled with every spell he cast, he would not falter. The living would stand, and Samwell Tarly would stand with them, black heart in hand, forging a new legend in the old and bloody annals of the North. Sam needed another day to gather enough strength to leave his pallet. Though the ache in his chest dulled somewhat, every muscle still felt tender, as though he'd run from the wall to Dorne without rest. Yet the need for speed continued to press upon him. The battered men at the last hearth sought any moment's solace, but rumors spread swiftly of fresh horrors on the horizon. Scouts who crept northward returned with quiet, haunted faces and grim words. The Night King gathered his greatest host on the plains near the shivering forest, and he would not be deterred from marching south. While the defenders had managed a precious victory here, it was only the flicker of a candle in a pitch-black night. Jon Snow wasted little time. Even as Sam convalesced, the new king in the north, though that title carried burdens heavier than any crown, planned. He spoke with Brienne, Davos, and the remaining lords about the next steps. Winterfell had begun to rally more forces, and Sansa Stark prepared the fortress for another siege. There was talk that the Vale might send more knights, that some northern houses would muster their final able-bodied men. Yet they all knew the largest conflict loomed. If the White Walkers advanced in unstoppable numbers, no single fortress, no single barrier would be enough. Jon wished to strike first. "We can't just wait for the Night King to make his next move," he insisted one evening as Sam eased himself closer, listening. Jon's voice was low and intense in the firelit hall, near a long table piled with maps, half-burnt candles, and scattered parchments describing the region. "If we sit behind walls, we'll be besieged again and again. The numbers of the dead seem endless. We need to meet him on ground of our choosing, and we need Sam's magic to break them." Sam's lips parted in silent protest. The notion of going on the offensive terrified him. The last time he'd used the barrier, it had nearly killed him. Yet he knew they had no choice. Keeping a fortress under constant siege was no path to victory. If the war was truly to end, they'd have to face the Night King, kill him directly, and shatter the army of whites at its source. Most men had concluded that if the Night King fell, the rest of the undead might crumble. Or so they prayed. Davos grimly tapped a spot on the map. The barrows east of here led into a wide expanse of frozen ground. We might not get good cover, but we could funnel them if we plan it right. The question is how to ensure Sam lives long enough to keep that barrier up. The Night King has powers all his own. He can wield storms or raise the dead in the thick of battle. And that leaves us one small slip from disaster. Brienne, standing tall at Jon's flank, folded her arms. We have to buy Sam time to invoke the magic in a place that benefits us. Perhaps near the old fortress called King's Dell. The ruins there form a natural half-ring of high walls from some bygone age. If the Night King's forces come at us, we can anchor ourselves in those ruins and let Sam block the largest gap. Then, with any luck, we pick off the White Walkers among them. Jon studied the map. That's a gamble, but everything is at this point. We have to try. His eyes flicked to Sam's. Would you be ready in a few days? We can't rest here too long, or we'll lose momentum. Sam swallowed, nodding despite the dread that gnawed at his insides. I'll be ready. I've been studying the Codex, trying to see if there's a way to lessen the burden on my life force. But even if I can't, I'll do my best. Jon rested a hand on Sam's shoulder. You've done more than anyone could ask, Sam. But we need you. The living need you. One dead night, let's see. That evening, after the council ended, Jon escorted Sam to a small corner of the hall where a rickety table stood. The space was as private as one could get in the overstuffed fortress. The wind whistled outside the broken window slats. I never got to thank you properly, Jon said, voice tight with the sincerity that always colored his words. For forging this amulet, for saving us twice now. How did a cowardly steward end up the realm's best hope against the dead? Sam managed a shaky laugh. I asked myself the same question. I don't feel particularly brave, only determined. We all have a part to play. Mine is apparently reading half-rotten scrolls and chanting old incantations. Ninny. Jon's gaze softened. Your father would be forced to eat his own words if he saw you now, Sam. Sam's heart clenched at the mention of Randall Tarley. He believed me worthless in war, but I suppose there's more than one way to fight. Jon squeezed Sam's shoulder again, letting a faint warm smile touch his features before leaving him to rest. Sam felt a bittersweet pang. Randall had always tried to hammer him into the shape of a warrior with a sword, never imagining that Sam might protect armies with knowledge. He thought of Gilly far away, hopefully safe in Winterfell, and prayed that this final confrontation would come soon, and end well. In the dimness of the next morning, Sam forced himself out of bed, ignoring the stiffness in his limbs. He made his way to the half-ruined library within the last hearth, a cramped chamber with sagging shelves. The wooden roof beams leaked snow in places, but it offered quiet. There, he unwrapped the Black Codex, careful not to damage its fragile pages, and resumed his search for any mention of distributing the spells cast among multiple participants. If he could teach even one or two loyal souls how to channel some fraction of their life force into the Black Heart, Sam's own burden might lighten. But the instructions were archaic and dangerously vague. The text described a ritual circle, something about each participant cutting themselves and letting their blood drip into a vessel of living flame. Sam recognized that as the glass candle. But the procedure demanded precise incantations from each person, correct synergy of breath and will. If a single participant faltered, the surge of power could rebound and kill them all. Madness, Sam whispered to the dust-laden gloom. As desperate as they were, he wasn't sure he could ask anyone to risk such a thing. But perhaps a handful would volunteer, if it meant saving thousands. The difficulty was time. Would they have enough days to attempt the ritual before marching out? He closed the codex, massaging his temples. The library smelled of old parchment and damp plaster. He stood and left, stepping into the corridor. Brienne was waiting, leaning against the wall. I had a feeling you'd be reading, she said, a wry tilt to her mouth. Davos is mustering the men to depart tomorrow at first light. Jon wants to speak with you one last time, to ensure we're set. Sam nodded, falling in step beside her. He'd grown increasingly comfortable with Brienne's presence over the past weeks. Despite her imposing stature and unwavering seriousness, she had a warmth behind her eyes that reminded him of the kindness he'd once found in Pipper Granite Castle Black, a quiet understanding born of battles fought and loyalties shared. They found John in the courtyard, speaking with a group of newly arrived spearmen. The yard was churned to muddy slush by boots and hooves. The ramparts overhead looked ready to collapse from the damage wrought by white attacks, but they still stood, at least for now. John spotted Sam and dismissed the soldiers with a nod. "We march south," he said to Sam. "Hardly seems right, heading south to find the Night King, but that's how the land lies. The terrain near Kingsdale might be where we can force a decisive engagement before he crosses the last river in force." Sam took a deep breath. "I understand. Just promise we'll have men near me. If whites swarm from multiple angles, I won't be able to hold them with the barrier alone." John put a hand on Longclaw's pommel. "You'll have knights at your side, Sam. And me, if the gods will it. I only hope the Night King appears where we need him to. The last thing we want is to bait him and end up with him slipping around us to strike at Winterfell." "No." Sam's mind flashed to Gilly, to the baby, to Sansa, to all the innocents counting on them. "We have to trust the scouts. He's not a mindless creature. He seeks to destroy the living. If we offer a challenge on open ground, with a large host, I suspect he'll come." John nodded, though his gray eyes betrayed a lingering worry. They parted ways again, making final preparations. Sam fetched the black heart from where it was kept under lock and key in a small chest. The carved dragonglass shimmered faintly, as though it recognized the approach of conflict. He braced himself for the days ahead. That afternoon, Sam noticed a small group of men on the ramparts, whispering to each other while looking at him. He recognized two of them as watchers from the Dreadfort. Approaching, he found them discussing the rumor that Sam's amulet was devilry, that it drew on dark magic. They seemed fearful, uncertain if they wanted to follow a man who used the blood arts. Sam tried to address them gently, explaining that he used lost knowledge only for the sake of the living. Still, their faces remained uneasy. This was the price of dabbling in powers few understood. Even so, Sam saw some grudging respect. When one of them asked if it was true that Sam single-handedly halted an army of the dead, Sam stammered that it was not single-handed, that the entire host had fought. But the soldier insisted Sam's magic was the reason they'd survive. Sam realized he had become a living legend among some, a figure both revered and feared. When night fell, the defenders gathered meager rations, mended armor, and settled into fitful sleep in the battered keeps of the last hearth. Sam managed only a few hours of rest. He dreamed of the wall crumbling beneath a tide of whites, of Gilly's screams echoing through empty corridors, of the black heart amulet throbbing like a living organ in his hands. By dawn, he awoke, drenched in cold sweat, exhausted yet again. There was no choice but to move on. The realm did not wait. Outside, horns sounded in the pale light. The column formed, mostly riders, a few wagon teams carrying supplies and the wounded who were still able to travel. They left a token garrison to hold the last hearth. Sam rode near John, with Davos and Brienne close. The wind bit at their faces. They passed the bleak sight of fields strewn with half-buried corpses from past skirmishes. Ravens circled overhead. The ground crunched under hoof, an endless expanse of ice-laden path. No one spoke much. The gravity of their mission settled like a weight on every shoulder. Around midday, they spotted distant columns of smoke twisting into the sky. The men tensed, weapons clattering. Fearing a White Walker ambush, John sent scouts forward. When they returned, they reported a group of refugees, small folk from some outlying farms, who'd lit fires to keep warm while trying to flee south. The sight of ragged families, eyes hollow, children bundled in threadbare cloaks, tore at Sam's heart. The living truly were scattered, forced from their homes, half frozen in flight. John deterred to speak with them, offering what little food could be spared. Sam lingered at the rear, thinking bitterly that no matter how many times he used the barrier, he could not save everyone. The refugees recognized Jon Snow's name, recognized the direwolf sigil, and some wept with relief. They spoke of hearing rumors that a hero with a black stone heart protected the living. Sam felt heat flush his cheeks as a few turned wide-eyed stares on him. He offered them only a timid smile. Their gratitude was raw, and it weighed on him. If he failed, if the magic proved too weak, or if he collapsed, the nightmare of letting these people down gnawed at his insides. He resolved to be stronger. The column resumed its march. Over the next few days, they trudged across fields hardened by winter, through small stands of stunted trees, the wind never ceasing. Each night, they made a rough camp under the open sky or in broken watchtowers. The men grew tired, and so did the horses. Morale was kept aloft by the knowledge that they had at least scored some victories before, that they possessed a unique advantage in Sam's magic. But Sam overheard many worried questions. Will one man's blood be enough to hold off a horde led by the Night King? What happens if the White Walkers have new powers we haven't seen? He was asking the same things in his own head. On the 4th day of travel, they reached the outskirts of King's Dell, a place Sam had never heard of before. The dell turned out to be a broad depression in the land, ringed by a large ruin of weathered stone. It might once have been an ancient fortress, or perhaps a ring fort from the time of the first men. The walls had tumbled in places, leaving partial ramparts, a wide archway that resembled a gate, and random pillars. A narrow ravine opened on the northern side, which might serve as a funnel. The southern edge sloped gently upward, leading out onto open farmland. When they approached the perimeter, John dispatched scouts to ensure no whites lurked nearby. Soon enough, they found no sign of the undead, but signs of recent battle, scattered bones, the remains of a small White Walker raiding party that had clashed with someone. No living souls were found. John decided this was where they'd make their stand. The men spent the better part of the day repairing portions of the ring wall with rubble, though it was more symbolic than truly defensive. They built sharpened stakes, dug shallow trenches, and prepared for a siege, uncertain if the Night King would arrive within hours or days. Sam found an inner recess of the largest ruin, what looked like an old tower that had collapsed inward, and designated it for his ritual space. He recalled the portion of the codex describing multiple participants. Perhaps he could persuade a small handful to help him. If so, the barrier might be larger, stronger, and possibly less lethal for Sam. Late that afternoon, as snow clouds gathered, Sam summoned his courage and broached the subject with John, Brienne, and Davos in the makeshift war camp. He explained, voice halting, that the codex contained a ritual for distributing the life force cost among multiple volunteers. He laid out the potential benefits and the risks. One misstep, or any participant who lost their focus, might cause the magic to lash out with deadly effect. Brienne frowned. That's dark sorcery, Sam. You're already pushing yourself too far. Now you want to involve others? No. Sam folded his hands tightly. I don't want to. But the alternative is me attempting to hold a barrier against what could be tens of thousands of undead, led by the Night King. I worry I won't be enough. If one slip of concentration means the difference between holding and failing, it might help to share that burden. Davos, thoughtful, rubbed his stubble. We all know the cost of war. How many men would willingly take that risk, though? John closed his eyes briefly, seeming to weigh the decision. I can think of some who would. Veteran fighters who believe in this cause, men ready to do anything to protect the realm, but we can't force them. Sam nodded. The Codex says we need at least 3 volunteers, no more than 7. If too many join, the ritual becomes chaotic. The magic is old, the instructions are incomplete, but that's what it says. John turned to Brienne. Would you do it? I see no one more steadfast than you. She pressed her lips together, warring with the thought. At last, she nodded solemnly. If my participation spares lives, I'll do it. If the realm needs me to bleed for it, I will. No. Davos exhaled. I'll volunteer too. I've survived worse than I had any right to. If I can help keep the living alive, then so be it. Sam looked at them, heart constricting with gratitude. That's 2. If we can find 1 or 2 more, that might be enough. The incantation will be trickier to manage with more people, but hopefully the strain on each of us is less. John glanced at Sam. What about me? Sam nearly dropped the codex. We need you on the battlefield, John. Leading the men, fighting the White Walkers. Then, I can't lead if the dead pour in and kill us all. If this is the best chance, then I want to be part of it. Joan's tone was resolute. Sam weighed the suggestion carefully, flipping pages in the codex. It says each participant must remain within a few strides of the glass candle while chanting. If you do this, you can't be charging across the battlefield. You'd be stuck near me, sustaining the barrier. The men would lose your sword. John gazed at him, jaw set. If the barrier fails, they lose everything. Let others swing swords. There is more than one way to lead. If we're to face the Night King and the best hope is your magic, then I'll stand with you. Nah. Brienne looked like she wanted to protest. Davos too. But they recognized the logic, if grudgingly. Joan's presence might ensure the men rallied around the ritual site, protecting them. Sam nodded, swallowing. Then it's settled. The four of us will attempt the ritual. They began their preparations in the old tower. That evening, under torchlight, Sam laid out the black heart amulet and the glass candle from the Citadel. The candle had not needed relighting since Sam first sparked it. It held an eerie glow within, as if feeding on some unseen source. The codex required them to form a circle around the candle, each with a shallow cut in the palm or forearm, letting blood drip into a small basin so that the flames might feed on it. Then, chanting in unison, they would infuse the black heart with this shared life force. Sam's chest tightened at the memory of how it felt to sacrifice blood. Yet what they were about to do was more complicated, more dangerous. John insisted on going first. He pressed a blade against his forearm, hissing softly as blood welled. He held it over the small basin near the candle flame. Brienne and Davos followed, grim-faced but calm. Sam was last. The codex said the primary caster should be the one who had awakened the heart initially, so Sam's role would remain crucial. He recited the old lines in High Valyrian, directing each participant to speak certain words in turn. The language was thick on their tongues. Davos stumbled over the guttural syllables, and Brienne's voice shook. John, though never fully trained in Valyrian, tried his best, guided by Sam's whispered corrections. The air in the ruin was cold, but soon it seemed to grow colder still, as though an unseen presence drained the warmth. The flicker of the glass candle brightened, turning a greenish hue that danced with unnatural clarity on the stone walls. The black heart lay in the center, dark as midnight. Sam felt a sudden tug deep in his chest, as though a hand reached inside him, drawing out threads of his essence. He bit back a cry, forcing himself to keep chanting. Blood dripped into the basin. The flame made a faint hissing sound, nearly drowned by the pounding in Sam's ears. He heard Davos gasp, Brienne grunt through gritted teeth, John's breathing quickening. The codex had warned that the participants would feel their souls laid bare. Sam's vision blurred. He clutched the black heart and lifted it into the candle's glow. The swirl of strange luminescence seeped into the carved stone. Sam's voice rose in a final invocation, invoking the threshold, naming the bond that would allow them all to stand as one against the dead. He sensed the others channeling their will into the circle. The synergy became a single wave. A rush of energy coursed through the amulet. Sam's blood roared in his veins, simultaneously burning and freezing. For a moment, he wondered if they'd all be consumed. Then, abruptly, the pressure eased. The green light receded into the black heart, leaving the tower in hushed darkness, the torchlight seeming feeble by comparison. Sam nearly collapsed, but Brienne caught his arm, her own face drawn and pale. Davos leaned against the wall, breathing raggedly. John fell to one knee, sweat beading on his brow. Yet they lived. Slowly, Sam steadied himself, looking to the codex. A droplet of blood stained the page where it lay open. He wiped it away, though the brownish smear remained. "We've done it," he whispered, voice shaky. "If the translation is correct, we can now share the barrier's strain." John caught his breath. "That felt like a shadow passing through me." Davos laughed weakly. "Thought I was going to fall over dead. Let's hope it's worth it." Brienne released Sam's arm, flexing her hand to restore sensation. "And if one of us stops chanting or is killed..." Sam closed the codex, exhaustion dragging at him. "We'd lose their contribution, but the others might still hold the barrier, albeit weaker. Or the backlash might be lethal, if it happens at the wrong moment. The text isn't very precise." They shared uneasy looks. This was no easy path, but they had chosen it. Slowly, They tidied the ritual site, discarding the basin of blood-streaked ash in a discreet place outside the tower. Sam stored the codex, wrapped the black heart in cloth, and extinguished the torches. Their souls felt raw, as though they had no words to describe what had happened. One by one, they departed into the snowy night, too drained for conversation. The next day, Sam attempted a small test of their new bond. He asked John, Brienne, and Davos to stand with him near the ring wall, out of sight of the men for now. They formed a loose circle, hands raised, and Sam recited a truncated version of the incantation. At once he felt an echo of power that did not wholly come from him. The black heart thrummed in his grip, the faint swirl of color weaving through it. An invisible aura spread around them, and though Sam felt the drain, it was far less crushing than before. He saw the strain etched on John's face, on Brienne's tight jaw, but not so severe that they collapsed. The barrier glimmered with promise, a shimmering half-translucent veil in the cold air. Sam let it dissipate after a few moments and they all exhaled. Davos touched his chest. Well, it didn't kill us. That's a fair start. Brienne nodded, relief in her eyes. Now we just need to do it while Whites and White Walkers hammer at us in the thousands. They returned to camp to share the news with the other commanders, who felt a wave of fresh hope at hearing the barrier might be stronger. They prepared for battle in earnest. More days passed without sign of the Night King, which unsettled many. Some believed he must have begun marching on Winterfell instead, bypassing them. Others argued that he'd take the same route as his underlings had. Scouts were sent out day and night, returning with little to report but heavy skies and endless fields of ice. The tension grew. Provisions ran low. While men sullenly sharpened swords, hammered arrowheads from dragon glass, and waited. It was on the 8th day at Citadel, in the dead of night, that the horns sounded from the perimeter. Sam jerked awake in his bedroll, heart pounding. A runner burst into his tent, breathless. They come. Blue eyes in the dark, thousands. Sam threw on his cloak, clutching the black heart in trembling hands. He scrambled outside. The entire camp was rousing, men piling out of tents, arms jingling, voices sharp with fear or determination. Snow swirled in the moonlight. Brienne appeared beside him, calm but for the tightness in her expression. Davos emerged from the gloom, pulling on his gloves, a short sword belted at his side. Jon Snow's voice rose over the tumult, calling men to formation. Archers to the wall, spearmen in the gaps, the rest form on me. The ring of stone that encircled the dell bristled with torches and shadowy figures. Sam, Davos and Brienne rushed to join Jon near the old tower. They found him adjusting his cloak, Valyrian steel sword glinting at his hip. His eyes flashed with grim resolve. Our scouts spotted them. The Night King is with them. He's here, Sam. They approached from the north. Would he? Sam's blood ran cold. So soon, so suddenly, in the dead of night. But perhaps it was better this way. They prepared as best they could. He breathed in, centering himself, letting the knowledge of their ritual fortify his nerves. Then we do our part. Men scurried in all directions, lighting signal fires along the half-fallen wall. Sam climbed the crumbling steps to a parapet, carefully scanning the darkness. At first he saw only swirling snow and flickers of torchlight. Then, far beyond the ring of ruins, he glimpsed a rolling, shifting mass of shadow. It surged across the field, blotting out the moonlit plain. Whites, beyond counting, their eyes reflecting the cold gleam of starlight. Their ragged shapes made Sam's breath catch. Had the host grown even larger than before? His heart thudded as he saw riders among the mass, White Walkers perched upon dead horses. And one figure at the rear, tall, crowned in frost, the very air around him seeming to swirl with malevolent power. The Night King. The defenders braced. Horns blasted, men steadied their pikes, archers drew bowstrings, the hush of terror settling like a cloak. Sam clutched the black heart. Jon, Brienne, and Davos formed up beside him, exchanging tense nods. They had rehearsed this. Once the undead pressed close, they would step forward and invoke the barrier. The rest of the defenders would flank from the sides, using the ring wall to funnel the Whites into the teeth of Sam's magic. If the plan worked, they might hold them in place and strike at the White Walkers, or even the Night King himself. The whites advanced with an eerie silence, broken only by the rustle of limbs and the faint clack of bones. The men atop the ring wall let loose a volley of arrows once the undead were in range. Some whites crumpled, pinned by dragging glass arrowheads, others stumbled, but still the tide surged forward. White walkers stepped calmly through the chaos, their eyes scanning the fortress ruins for the greatest threat. Then, with a terrible scream, the horde rushed the ring wall. Sam's breathing grew labored. The moment had come. He raised the black heart. John, Brienne, and Davos closed ranks around him, arms almost touching. The air crackled with tension. Sam chanted, the words rolling across his tongue. John, Brienne, and Davos joined in, stumbling over the strange syllables but pressing on. Immediately, Sam felt a wave of cold seep into his marrow, as though the night itself had found a path into his veins. He clenched his teeth. The black heart glowed, and through that glow, Sam could sense the presence of the others, their lifeblood fueling the barrier. A swirl of ghostly luminescence radiated outward. The closest whites recoiled, some flung back as if struck by an invisible hammer. Howls rose from their broken throats. The men along the walls cheered, though their voices were quickly swallowed by the din of battle. More undead pressed in, driven by the White Walkers' silent command. But they smashed against the forming barrier, unable to cross that shimmering line. Whites scrabbled at the ground, climbing over each other, only to be cast back or pinned in place. Sam's vision swam with half-seen shapes, the swirling energies of life and death. He saw the black heart pulsing with color that matched his own heartbeat. No, not just his. He sensed John's determination, Davos' dogged resolve, Brienne's steadfast courage, all braided into the amulet's light. The barrier widened, stretching across the main breach in the ring wall. It was stronger, broader than Sam had ever managed alone. The whites battered it from all directions, some trying to scramble around the edges, but defenders stationed there thrust with spears to repel them. The White Walkers at the rear calmly assessed this new development. One lifted an icy spear and hurled it in a high arc. It soared overhead and plunged into the ring wall with a flash of frost, cracking stone and sending men tumbling. Another White Walker raised a hand, conjuring a swirl of freezing mist that drifted toward the barrier. Sam felt a surge of pressure as that cold magic slammed against them. The amulet in his hand vibrated violently. He fought to keep his chant steady. He heard Brienne grunt, Davos curse, Joan's voice rise in a desperate vow to hold. Above the moiling mass, Sam glimpsed the Night King, silent, impassive, mounted on a dead creature that might once have been a great elk or horse, its eyes burning with azure flame. The Night King lifted a pale arm. Sam braced, expecting a wave of cold, but instead, the monstrous figure gestured toward the fields behind him. A portion of the ground erupted as half-buried corpses rose at his command. More reinforcements. The undead ranks swelled. With meticulous inevitability, they encircled the entire ruin. The defenders realized they might be surrounded. John shouted above the roar, "Archers! Fire from the flanks. Drive them to the barrier." The plan was to compact the whites in front of Sam's invisible wall but not let them slip behind the ring. Arrows rained down. Men with torches hurled oil-soaked javelins. The gloom lit with flickers of flame, and the stench of burning corpses spread. Sam kept chanting, his throat raw, his eyes burning. Each second felt like an hour. He could feel the magic siphoning from Brienne, Davos, John, and himself, but at least it wasn't all on him now. The barrier held firm, repelling wave after wave. The men on the walls hacked at any whites that tried to scramble over collapsed sections. Yet, for all their efforts, the horde was massive, seemingly without end. Sam's arms ached from holding the amulet aloft. He feared the moment when their combined stamina would fail. If the barrier fell too soon, the whites would flood in, overwhelming the defenders. Then, one of the White Walkers marched forward, carving a path through its own whites. It stopped just shy of the barrier, staring at Sam with eyes of glacial blue. Its armor glimmered like hoarfrost. Lifting its icy blade, it pressed the tip against the barrier. A shrill cry sounded, and Sam felt a dagger of cold slice through his consciousness. Brienne staggered, clutching her temple. Davos groaned, doubling over. John snarled, still chanting, voice forced. The black heart flickered, the barrier wavering under this direct assault. Sam clenched his jaw, mustering every iota of will. He poured out the incantation, feeling Brienne, Davos, John do the same. The White Walker's blade pressed deeper, frost crackling against the invisible threshold. Then, with a surge of shared resolve, they pushed back. A wave of luminescent force radiated from the amulet. The White Walker reeled, ice fracturing along the length of its blade, which shattered in a spray of glittering shards. The creature screeched in fury and stumbled back into the throng. The defenders roared in triumph, loosing another hail of arrows. A dragonglass shaft caught the White Walker in the chest. It froze, cracks spreading across its torso, and then it shattered like brittle ice. The exultation was short-lived, because overhead, a keening wail sounded, and Sam saw something that turned his blood to water. In the swirling clouds above, a shape emerged, a gaunt silhouette of a dragon, its wings tattered, its body undead and rotting, blazing eyes of blue. The Night King had not come alone. One of Daenerys' fallen dragons soared in the swirling snow, unbound by life, twisted into an instrument of the dead. Sam heard men screaming in terror as the monstrous beast descended. Its jaws opened, unleashing a torrent of pale blue flame upon the ring wall. Stone cracked from the extreme cold, men and horses frozen in an instant, their bodies shattering as they toppled. Chaos erupted. The defenders panicked, some fleeing from the ring wall, others firing arrows uselessly into the sky. The undead dragon circled, the wind from its ragged wings buffeting the fortress. Sam realized that if it unleashed that freezing fire upon the barrier's position, none of them would survive. Yet they had no choice but to maintain the incantation. If they broke the circle, the whites would storm through. Jon shouted, "Archers! Aim for its eyes. Anyone with a dragonglass spear, throw!" It was a desperate gambit, but a few men mustered enough courage to hurl spears at the passing beast. Most missed or bounced harmlessly off its scales. One spear struck near the undead dragon's flank, embedding itself but seemingly causing minimal damage. The creature shrieked, banking sideways. While the dragon soared overhead, the whites slammed into the barrier again, spurred by White Walkers trying to exploit the distraction. Sam's head pounded. He realized they could not hold indefinitely if that undead dragon continued blasting them from above. They needed to kill it, or at least drive it off. But how? He saw no archers near enough, no scorpion or ballista. Just foot soldiers with meager gear. Suddenly, a burst of fire lit the night from the southwestern side of the dell. A swirling column of orange flame erupted, cutting across the sky. A second dragon, alive, enormous, scales glinting in the flicker of its own fire. The defenders gasped in astonishment and fear. Had Daenerys Targaryen returned? Or was it another rumored dragon? It swooped closer, unleashing a torrent of normal dragon fire at the undead beast overhead. The two dragons clashed in midair with a deafening roar, fire against frost. Snow melted in steaming sheets as the living dragon's flame scorched the night. The undead creature fought back with its freezing breath, swirling ice around them. They snapped and grappled in the sky, blotting out the moon. Sam could hardly believe his eyes. The living dragon wore no visible rider. Then, in a fleeting glimpse, Sam thought he saw a lone figure clinging to the creature's spined back, a figure in thick leathers, perhaps one of Daenerys' unsung followers, or a Northman braver than sense. But there was no time to wonder. The living dragon's intervention offered the defenders a chance. While the two beasts fought overhead, the whites' assault continued. Sam and his circle kept chanting, voice after voice straining in unison. The black heart flared bright. In a moment of clarity, Sam realized that the synergy was working. Though he felt drained, he was not on the brink of collapse. He could feel Jon's strength, Brienne's calm, Davos' grit coursing through the chant, keeping the barrier strong. The living dragon pinned its undead counterpart against the swirling clouds, jaws snapping at the rotting flesh of its foe's throat. For a moment, the undead dragon flailed, spitting its icy flame into the sky. Then, with a triumphant roar, the living dragon exhaled a torrent of fire directly into its enemy's maw. There was a thunderous crack as the undead beast's head ignited in a burst of searing heat, bone and charred flesh exploding outward. It thrashed, shredding the living dragon's flank with claws in a death spasm, but the blow was not enough to save it. Its great body plummeted, smashing into the ground outside the ring wall in a cloud of snow and debris. Its vile flames flickered out, leaving a carcass that twitched for a few moments before going still. In the hush that followed, defenders on the walls cried out in stunned disbelief and cheer. A living dragon had come to their aid, slaying the unholy abomination. But the living dragon itself was wounded, battered, trailing blood from deep gouges. It let out a pained roar, turning away from the ring fortress to spiral down behind a ridge, possibly to land or lick its wounds. Sam's mind spun at the implications. Had Daenerys returned from across the sea? Or had some other Targaryen survivor come north with a dragon? But those questions would wait. Now the greatest threat remaining was the Night King, who still commanded the Whites outside Sam's barrier. Through the swirl of snow and the flicker of torches, Sam saw the Night King dismount, leaving behind the undead elk horse, stepping forward to face the fortress personally. Men shouted warnings. Jon's chanting hitched, and Sam felt him tremble, though he did not break the circle. The Night King's presence was palpable, a coldness that sank deeper than flesh. This, Sam realized, was the final test. If the Night King could shatter the barrier or circumvent it, the living would be doomed. The dark shape advanced, whites parting around him in mindless obedience. He stopped mere steps from the invisible wall. Sam saw him raise a pale, long-fingered hand. A swirl of frost-laden wind collided with the barrier. A thunderous boom shook the earth. Sam and the others rocked back, nearly knocked off their feet. The amulet's glow flickered dangerously. From the corner of his eye, Sam saw Davos retch blood, saw Brienne quail as though struck in the stomach, saw Jon grit his teeth so hard, Sam feared they'd crack. Sam himself felt as though shards of ice were driving into his brain. But they stayed upright, chanting, refusing to yield. The Night King tilted his head, as though curious. He pressed his other hand forward, channeling a second wave of bitter cold that crackled with sharp blasts of lightning like frost. Stones froze and cracked around the circle. The ring wall behind them groaned, shedding lumps of ice. Still, the barrier held. Sam sensed the synergy within the Black Heart struggle to contain this monumental force. Another wave struck. Then another. Each hit made Sam scream, his voice mingling with Brienne's ragged cry and Davos' hoarse shouts, Jon's fierce roar. But the barrier did not fail. The Whites shrieked, surging forward in a frenzy. Some found ways to crawl around the ring's perimeter, but the defenders, heartened by the memory of the undead dragon's defeat, fought back with savage vigor. Swords and spears clashed against rotted flesh. Dragon glass axes hewed through limbs. The ring fortress became a cacophony of chaos. Everywhere men fought in swirling snow, the Night King's cold hammering the barrier from the front. Then, from somewhere behind Sam, a small band of northern soldiers roared a battle cry and charged out of the ring wall, flanking the Whites that had gathered near the Night King. They hoped to disrupt his assault. The Whites turned, clawing and biting. The White Walkers among them responded with lethal skill, but each time one advanced, a volley of dragon glass arrows forced it back. The defenders had learned quickly. The Night King pivoted regarding these mortal gnats. Sam could barely see, tears frozen on his lashes, the chants pouring out of his throat with desperate fervor. His entire body throbbed. The Black Heart felt scalding hot in his palm, though the air around him was subarctic. Another wave of magic from the Night King slammed the barrier, but it was weaker, or at least less precise. The Whites near him had become tangled with the charging soldiers. Some men died in seconds, torn apart by undead strength, but others managed to circle the Night King, brandishing dragonglass spears. Sam's heart thundered, waging a silent plea. Do it now, while he's distracted. Kill the Night King. He felt Jon shift, the chanting wavering. Jon wanted to break from the circle to rush the Night King himself, as he'd done with so many White Walkers before. But if Jon left, the barrier might collapse. Sam and Davos and Brienne alone might not withstand another direct assault. Sam forced his chanting louder, urging Jon to remain. He felt tears break free when he realized how impossible it must be for Jon to watch from within the circle. But the synergy needed all of them. They were so close. The defenders had the White Walkers pinned outside. The Whites battered from all sides. If only someone else could land a killing blow. Into the swirling melee strode a figure with a sword in each hand, leather armor caked in frost, eyes blazing with fervor. Arya Stark. Sam recognized her instantly. He had not even known she was there, had not seen her arrive with the reinforcements from Winterfell. She moved like a wraith, weaving between whites with lethal grace. They toppled around her, spines severed by daggers of dragon glass. She spun, ducking under a White Walker's frosty blade, rolling across the snow. The White Walker lunged, but she sidestepped, plunging a dagger into its side. It shattered with a high-pitched keen. Then, without pausing, she sprinted toward the Night King, who was locked in combat with a half-dozen men. Sam's mind screamed warnings for her to run away. But Arya advanced with fearless precision, stooping low behind the whites that ringed the Night King. He stood, striking down one soldier with a single blow of an ice spear, barely noticing her. Arya dove in. Her dagger slashed across his back, except the Night King whirled with inhuman speed, capturing her wrist mid-strike. For a moment, they froze in a tableau, Arya's eyes wide, the Night King's face impassive, the swirling snow drifting. Then she let the dagger fall from her trapped hand and snatched it in her free hand midair, twisting her body in a fluid spin. She rammed the dagger toward the Night King's midsection. He raised an arm in a blur, blocking with a flare of cold magic that nearly knocked her off her feet. Yet she persevered, shifting the angle, plunging the blade into his flank. The sound was like glass meeting ice. A crack spread across the Night King's torso, shimmering in the pale moonlight. He made no sound, but his entire body trembled. Frost hissed along his limbs, fracturing. Arya yanked the dagger free, stumbling back. The Night King turned his head as if to regard her, ice-blue eyes flickering. Then he shattered, splintering from within, exploding outward in a wave of icy shards and vapor. The thunder of his destruction pulsed across the battlefield. For a heartbeat, every white froze in place, the terrible light in their eyes flickering. Then, one by one they collapsed, lifeless lumps falling to the ground like marionettes with cut strings. White Walkers similarly disintegrated, their forms cracking into crystalline dust. Sam felt the barrier's opposing force vanish in an instant. He pitched forward, losing his balance. Brienne caught his arm, Davos stumbled, Jon sank to a knee. The black heart's glow faded rapidly. The sudden silence was deafening. No undead moans, no frenzied shrieks. Just the wind, the crackling of a few fires, the labored breathing of survivors. They had done it. Arya had done it. The Night King was gone, and with him the entire undead horde. Sam's vision wavered, exhaustion claiming him, but he clung to consciousness long enough to see men dropping weapons, some crying out in exultation or relief or sorrow for the lost. Brienne's face was streaked with tears. Davos' mouth hung open, unable to form words. Jon rose unsteadily, searching the battlefield for Arya. She stood a few paces away from the crater of ice shards, breathing hard, her dagger, Valyrian steel, still clenched in her fist. For a moment no one moved, as if afraid to believe it was real. Then men rushed forward to gather the wounded, to confirm the whites were truly dead. Jon limped to Arya, and they embraced, a raw moment of siblings reuniting on the battlefield of the living's salvation. Sam let out a ragged sob, both of agony and profound relief. Their circle had done what it needed to do. They had bought the living time. The night stretched on as the survivors counted their dead, tended the wounded, and tried to piece together the immensity of what had happened. Sam, still reeling, was carried into a makeshift infirmary. Brienne hovered protectively, bruised and battered but refusing to leave him. Davos insisted on checking Sam's wounds. In truth, Sam had no major injury aside from the cuts from the ritual and the lethal exhaustion that weighed on him. The cost had been spread among them all, and so none had been wholly consumed. Men whispered of the living dragon that vanished over the ridge. A scouting party claimed they found its tracks in the snow, along with a trail of blood, but no sign of the beast itself or any rider. Rumors abounded. Perhaps it was Rhaegal or Drogon returned. Perhaps a new dragon hatched from some hidden egg. Perhaps it was all just an illusion born of desperation. Regardless, its timely intervention had saved them from the undead dragon's wrath. That miracle was enough. By dawn, a scale of victory was evident. No wight stirred. No White Walkers reformed from shards. The entire host had perished with the Night King. The ring fortress stood battered but still in the hands of the living. The men joked, grimly, that they should rename Citadel to something like Dawn's Hope. Sam sat up, wincing as every muscle ached, and stared out over the battlefield from a gap in the wall. Thousands of corpses of wights lay in disintegrating piles. Over time, many were crumbling to dust or rotted flesh, vanishing as the foul magic that animated them faded. Even the air smelled different, as if the heavy stench of death was finally retreating. John found Sam resting by the wall, leaning on a piece of broken rampart. "How are you?" John asked softly. He still looked half in shock, but there was a light in his eyes Sam hadn't seen in a long time. Sam tried to smile. "Alive," which, by all logic, shouldn't be possible after that. "Niwanawage." John exhaled, glancing over the field. "We owe you so much, Sam. Without your barrier, the Whites would have torn us apart long before Arya got that final blow." Sam swallowed, recalling the raw terror of holding back the Night King's onslaught. "We all played our parts. Brienne, Davos, you gave your strength to the amulet. Arya delivered the final strike. The men on the walls fought bravely. Even that unknown dragon. God, so much had to go right." John gazed at Sam, a small smile touching his tired face. A miracle, or maybe it was meant to be. The living were never meant to lie down and die. Sam thought of Gilly, of the baby, of how they could live now without fear of an undead tide sweeping them away. Tears welled in his eyes again. Winter might still be harsh, we might still have war among the living, but this threat is gone. I can hardly believe it. John nodded slowly, resting a hand on Sam's shoulder. "You should rest and heal. We'll see to burying the dead or burning them. Then we return south, to Winterfell, to let everyone know the terror is ended. We'll shape a new future from these ruins." "Now, Kay." Sam's throat felt tight. "I just want to see Gilly again." "You will," John said, helping Sam to his feet. "We both will." Over the next days, the battered survivors slowly dismantled their camp. They burned the bodies of their fallen companions, erected markers for them, and watched as the white corpses further decayed or crumbled into dust. The Black Heart amulet, now quiet, no longer glowed or throbbed with unearthly power. Sam kept it wrapped in cloth, uncertain whether it held any magic at all without the presence of the dead. He considered returning it to the Citadel, though he doubted the Archmaesters would welcome him with open arms. Part of him wondered if he should destroy it, to ensure no one tried to use its blood magic again for ill purpose. For now, he kept it safe, unsure of the best course. Arya took her leave swiftly, after a tearful reunion with John, explaining she had unfinished business in the wide world. She refused to elaborate, merely saying she was proud to have fought at her brother's side once more. Sam watched her go, still awestruck by her feat. As for Brienne, she remained, standing vigil and helping to organize the men's journey back. Occasionally, Sam spotted her gazing at him with a mixture of relief and quiet admiration. He knew they had forged a bond in that circle of blood and magic, a shared burden that would never be forgotten. Davos, for his part, mostly busied himself with the tasks of seeing that the wounded were tended, that the living had some measure of comfort. But whenever Sam met his eyes, he saw in Davos a profound respect he'd never expected. They had survived the edge of oblivion together. When at last the day came to march back to Winterfell, Sam found a measure of peace. He rode slowly, scanning the horizon for any sign of that mysterious dragon, though none appeared. The earth was still scarred from the undead's passage, but at least the whites no longer roamed. That knowledge lifted spirits. The men in their column did not sing, for the memory of their fallen weighed heavily, but they wore expressions of solemn gratitude for life. Even the weather seemed to ease, with the clouds thinning, revealing glimpses of pale sun. The journey south took another week. They passed the Dreadfort, pausing briefly to share the glad news with its garrison, who erupted into cheers at hearing the Night King was dead. Then onward, back across the winter fields, until the towers of Winterfell rose into view. Approaching those walls felt surreal to Sam, for it was here that he had parted with Gilly. Now he came bearing tidings of final victory, but also carrying the burden of his own near sacrifices. They entered Winterfell's gates to raucous celebration. Word had traveled quickly that the White threat was ended, but seeing Jon and the others return confirmed it. Soldiers embraced each other, stable hands dropped everything to rush forward, the courtyard buzzing with relief. Sam dismounted stiffly, scanning for Gilly. He found her standing near the steps to the great hall, the baby in her arms. Her face was streaked with tears. She ran to him, nearly stumbling in her haste. Sam caught her, burying his face in her hair, letting out a shaky breath as the reality of being home, truly safe, crashed over him. They clung to each other, the baby caught between them, fussing at the jostling. Gilly kissed Sam's forehead, tears mingling with laughter. "You're back, and they say the monsters are gone?" Sam nodded, voice thick. "The Night King is dead, all the Whites gone. Jon, Arya, Brienne, Davos, so many others fought. We did it." He hardly recognized the trembling tone in his own words. Gilly clutched him tighter, her shoulders trembling. "Thank the gods. I was so worried. The ravens we got only told part of it. They said you fought with magic. You almost died, Sam." Sam felt the corners of his mouth lift in a tired, grateful smile. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He glanced down at the baby, who squirmed in Gilly's arms. "Are you all right?" "He's fine. We're fine. Just worried about you." Gilly reached up to brush the hair from his eyes, as if reassuring herself that this wasn't a dream. Sam kissed her cheek gently. "I'll explain everything, but for now, let's just breathe." All around them, reunion scenes played out, though some waited in vain for loved ones who would never return. The cost of victory weighed on Winterfell's heart as well. That night, a feast was prepared, a feast of gratitude and mourning both. Long tables were set in the great hall, though supplies were meager, and many had only broth and barley bread. Still, after the horrors they had faced, any meal was a blessing. Jon sat at the high table with Sansa and the other surviving lords, receiving well-wishers and giving thanks to each man and woman who had risked their lives. Brienne stood near Sansa, stoic, though she shared a few quiet smiles with those who thanked her. Davos nursed a mug of ale, looking older than ever, but also strangely at ease for the first time in months. Sam sat with Gilly, the baby on her lap, too overwhelmed to eat much. He felt content just to be with them. As the evening wore on and the firelight danced across the hall, Sansa rose to speak. A hush fell, broken only by the crackle of flames. "Tonight, we remember those who fought for the living. We remember the fallen. Many good men and women gave their lives that we might stand here free. But we also celebrate. For the Night King is no more, and the White Walkers that terrorized our world for generations have been vanquished." The hall erupted in cheers, though many eyes glistened with tears for lost friends. Sansa continued, voice steady. "This victory belonged to many, but we cannot deny the extraordinary deeds that made it possible. My brother Jon Snow, Sir Brienne of Tarth, Sir Davos Seaworth, and one who discovered how to use ancient knowledge to hold back an entire army of the dead. Samwell Tarly. Without you, Sam, we might not be alive." Sam felt every eye turn to him. His cheeks flamed. He tried to shrink into himself, unused to such public praise. Jon clapped from the high table, and the crowd echoed it. Gilly nudged Sam's arm, whispering, "Stand up, Sam!" He rose on unsteady legs, giving an awkward half-bow, receiving a thunderous applause that shook him to his core. He saw tears in Sansa's eyes, and a tremulous smile on Jon's lips. Even Brienne managed a small grin, as she politely clapped in gauntleted hands. Sam lowered himself back down, heart pounding. The feast continued with subdued revelry. Some sang sad ballads about fallen comrades, others told heroic tales. Sam listened more than spoke, content to hold Gilly's hand. He reflected on the black heart amulet he had locked away in a chest. The war was over, the dead destroyed. That artifact might never need to be used again. Though the Codex insisted that magic seldom disappeared, it only slept. Perhaps in time Sam could deliver it to a safe place, or bury it where no one would disturb its power. He had risked enough of his soul with that device. For the moment, however, he let the future remain uncertain. The living had won, And that was enough for one night. In the days that followed, Sam recovered slowly, physically and emotionally. He spent time with Gilly and the baby, relishing each moment of peace. Now that the nightmares of Whites were gone, it seemed the entire castle felt lighter, as though a curse had lifted. The Northern Lords began to discuss rebuilding, forging alliances, and how to handle the new dawn. Some looked to Jon for leadership, urging him to become king of the North in truth, to rule in peacetime as well as war. Jon demurred, uncertain of his path. Sansa, wise and calm, guided the logistics. Brienne often traveled between distant holds, carrying messages and settling disputes with the authority entrusted to her. Davos lingered, but he talked of eventually returning to the Stormlands, or perhaps King's Landing, to see if a new era of stability might help the realm unify. One crisp morning, Sam found Jon alone in the Godswood, standing before the Heart Tree. Jon turned when he heard Sam approach, a faint smile on his lips. Sam joined him silently, the snow underfoot crunching softly. The red leaves rustled overhead, drops of melted frost clinging to the branches. For a time neither spoke. Eventually, Jon broke the quiet. I never had the chance to truly mourn Daenerys, or all those we lost before this final war. But standing here, I realize we've come through something that could have ended everything, and we're still breathing. Sam bowed his head. She would be proud of what you did, of what we all did. You helped save the world she tried to unite. Jon's gaze lingered on the pale face carved into the trunk, the sap of the weirwood like old tears. I can't keep running from my past or my lineage. But I also don't want the Iron Throne. After seeing the horrors of the dead, I realize kingship is a small thing compared to the survival of the living. I'd rather help rebuild the North, let others squabble over titles. Nanshi. Sam swallowed, recalling once how he had wanted to be a maester, how he had studied so many books about kings and queens. Sometimes the best rulers are the ones who don't want to rule. But maybe the North doesn't need a king so much as it needs wise leaders. You and Sansa, both, bridging the old and the new. Jon exhaled, nodding faintly. I can try. But if ever you and Gilly want to leave, to return south, or anywhere, you should know you're always welcome here, or anywhere in the North. You're a hero, Sam. Nay. The word hero felt strange on Sam's ears. He fiddled with his cloak, unsure how to respond. I'd like some peace for a while. Gilly's never really had a proper home, so maybe Winterfell can be that place, at least for a time. But one day, I still want to finish my training as a maester, if they'll ever let me set foot in the Citadel again. He managed a small chuckle. They might have me arrested for stealing that glass candle. Jon allowed a hint of a grin. I'd pay good coin to see their faces when you tell them how you used it. Still, you should do what you feel is right. You've earned that much. Sam nodded, letting silence settle again between them. The wind stirred the branches overhead, letting in a shaft of winter sunlight. He thought of the countless volumes in the Citadel, of the secrets that might remain undiscovered, some dangerous, some enlightening. He thought of the Black Codex, so difficult to translate. Perhaps one day, he would see it locked safely away. Or perhaps he would burn it, ensuring no one repeated these dark rites. For now, he had time. Time to weigh the choices carefully. They walked back through the courtyard, where workers hauled lumber to repair the walls. Sansa, overseeing them, gave Sam a warm nod of greeting. Further along, Gilly laughed as the baby toddled in new-fallen snow, supervised by a friendly steward. Sam's heart swelled at the simple sight. The child's squeal of delight, Gilly's soft smile. This was what they had bled for, what they had stood against the dead to protect. Laughter, love, a future. When Sam joined Gilly, she beamed. He likes the snow, she said, glancing down at the child, who patted the icy ground with small mitts. Sam stooped to pick him up gently, pressing a kiss to his chubby cheek. The boy wriggled, giggling. Sam's eyes misted with gratitude. He flashed back to the battles, the necrotic chill, the endless nights spent searching old scrolls. All for this. All to ensure a world where his son could grow up free of terror. Gilly watched Sam, her expression tender. Are you truly all right, Sam? Sometimes at night you toss and turn, calling out in your sleep. He forced a reassuring smile. I have nightmares, but they'll fade. The memories might never fully leave, but I'm alive. We all are. That's enough for me now. He touched her hand, a silent promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Days melted into weeks. Life at Winterfell began to resemble a new normal. Scouts returned from all corners of the north, confirming that the Whites had collapsed wherever they stood. Small pockets of undead that had wandered far now lay inert. No White Walkers remained. The realm breathed free. Sansa sent ravens to every lord and lady in Westeros with the official word that the long night was ended, that the Night King was destroyed. Some responses came quickly. Lords of the Reach and Stormlands rejoiced in the death of the myth they had scarcely believed was real. The Vale Lords declared a day of thanks. Dorne apparently remained aloof as always, but rumors said they were relieved as well. Slowly, the wheels of politics began to turn again, less overshadowed by the threat of total annihilation. Amid this calm, Sam gathered his courage to revisit the Blackheart amulet. He retrieved it from the locked chest in his room. Gilly sat nearby, the baby sleeping in a cradle. Sam unwrapped the stone and gazed at it for a long time. Its surface was still the glossy black of dragon glass, shaped like a stylized heart. The hollow in its center, once filled by Sam's blood, was now empty. No glow emanated from within. It looked inert, almost mundane. Yet Sam knew the potential that lay inside. He thought of giving it to Sansa, letting it become a relic of the Starks. But that power, if misused, could be disastrous. He also thought of burying it beyond the wall, where no one would find it, or traveling back to the Citadel in secret and placing it in the depths of the Ebony Vault again. While he deliberated, Gilly spoke softly. "That thing saved us, but I can see how it haunts you. Maybe we don't need it anymore." Sam sighed. "It's dangerous, Gilly. But knowledge is dangerous too. Burying it might be wise, or it might mean future generations lose a powerful defense if ever new evils arise." He traced a finger across the stone's curve. "I always believed in preserving knowledge, but I never imagined it could be this costly." Gilly touched his arm. "You'll do what's right, Sam. You always have." He set the stone aside gently, kissed Gilly's forehead. For the moment, he decided to wait and see if circumstances changed. Perhaps he would consult with Jon or Sansa. For now, the realm deserved to heal, free from further turmoil. Word trickled in that King's Landing was embroiled in disputes over succession, with various claimants or regents. But none of that overshadowed the simple truth that the Great War, the war with the dead, was concluded. As winter's grip loosened months later, the North found a cautious rebirth. Fields were cleared of debris, new seeds planted. The small folk returned to their farms, or built new huts if the old ones were razed. Bards composed songs of the Long Night's final stand. They sang of Jon Snow, king in the north, and of his sister Arya the Night's Blade, and of Samwell Tarly, the Scholar of Death, who had conjured a barrier to hold back the tide. Sam always winced when he heard that last moniker. He did not feel like any grand Scholar of Death, only a man who had stumbled upon lost lore in desperation. When Sam listened to these songs, he found they rarely mentioned the countless others, Brienne, Davos, Gilly, or even the men and women who had died in droves. War was rarely so simple. Everyone's story was entangled in that victory. Over time, Sam realized that all he could do was share the truth when asked, to remind people that it was unity and courage from many hearts that had saved the living. He penned his own account of the war, scribbling it into a leather-bound journal, hoping that future generations might read a more nuanced version of the tale. He titled it, after much thought, A Chronicle of the Last Long Night, dedicating it to all who had fought for Dawn. Life settled, though Sam's nights were still punctured by occasional nightmares. He would wake in a cold sweat, certain he heard the shrieks of Whites. Gilly would comfort him, rubbing his back as he caught his breath. The baby would stir in his cradle, mewling, and Sam would rock him gently until the fear receded. In those moments, Sam found solace in the fact that he had done all he could. Perhaps that was the best any of them could claim. Eventually, a raven arrived bearing the Citadel's seal. To Sam's surprise, the Archmaesters wished to confirm rumors that Sam had indeed discovered and employed ancient sorceries to repel the dead. They expressed cautious admiration, if the phrase was not too generous. They also demanded the return of stolen property, presumably the glass candle. Sam bristled at the tone. The Archmaesters had refused to believe in the White Walker threat until it was nearly too late, and now they wanted an artifact that had saved the realm. Still, Sam's better nature prevailed. He wrote back, detailing the broad strokes of how the Black Heart was forged, omitting certain crucial details that would allow it to be replicated easily. He carefully indicated that the glass candle had been used in the forging process. He offered to return it on the condition that the Citadel recognized the contributions of those who had fought, and that they dedicate new scholarship to preparing the realm for any future threats, magical or otherwise. Whether or not the Citadel would accept Sam's terms remained to be seen. The raven that came back weeks later read like a polite but vague invitation to meet with the conclave of archmaesters in person. Sam wondered if it was a trap to censure him. Then again, perhaps they genuinely wanted to learn. He decided that for the time being, he preferred to remain in Winterfell with Gilly and the child. Let the archmaesters stew. If the realm was truly at peace, Sam could travel to Old Town in a few years, once the wound of war was less raw. And if they tried to punish him for saving the realm, well, that would say more about them than about Samwell Tarly. That first spring after the long night's end was a timid thing, uncertain whether to banish winter entirely. But small shoots of green pushed through the receding snowdrifts outside Winterfell. A sense of renewal permeated the air. Sam spent more time outdoors with Gilly and the baby, walking the courtyard, the godswood, and the open fields where tents had once stood. Each day brought a faint warmth that seemed an unimaginable gift after so much cold. The baby toddled on chubby legs, giggling at the crows that gathered on the ramparts. Gilly sometimes laughed, remembering the endless cold she had known beyond the wall. On one such day, as they strolled near the outer gate, Sam noticed Jon standing on the battlements gazing out at the horizon. Sam left Gilly with the baby, climbed the steps to join his friend. The wind whipped his cloak as he reached Jon's side. They took a moment to simply look out at the land beyond Winterfell's walls, the snow thinning to reveal patches of brown earth. Jon finally spoke, voice carried softly by the breeze. I never told you this, but at the last hearth, when the whites were pouring in, there was a moment I wanted to run at the Night King myself. I nearly left the circle. If I had, the barrier would have failed. We'd have all died. He exhaled slowly. It was your voice that kept me there. I heard you chanting, felt your will. And I remembered how you'd never abandoned me, not once. Even when we were new recruits at Castle Black. You're a true brother, Sam. Nay. Sam's eyes stung. He glanced away so Jon wouldn't see the tears. I'm glad you stayed. You're the reason we all survived, too. If you hadn't mustered the men, if you hadn't believed in me and that insane plan. He trailed off, shaking his head. It took all of us, Jon. Jon nodded solemnly, a faint smile ghosting over his lips. All of us, he echoed, letting the words linger. They stood in comfortable silence a while longer, each man reflecting on how close the world had come to ending. At last they parted ways, descending the steps. Sam found Gilly waiting. She offered him a gentle smile, took his hand, and together they headed back into Winterfell. The Black Heart amulet remained locked in his chest, silent testimony to a war that now lived in memory. Sam did not know what new challenges the realm might face, or whether he'd once again be called to do the impossible. But he knew one thing. He was no longer the frightened boy who had first arrived at the wall, nor the timid novice hidden away in the Citadel. He was Samwell Tarly, a man who had held death at bay, who had found courage in knowledge, and who had fought for the living with every part of his being. The realm entered a fragile peace, the living free from the terror of the undead. Across the wide expanse of Westeros, people spoke of that final stand in hushed awe. They told of the eerie glow of Sam's barrier, the swirling snow, the shrieks of whites halted by an invisible line of magic. They told of Arya Stark's lethal blade, of Jon Snow's unwavering leadership, of Brienne's indomitable spirit, of Davos' quiet resolve. And they told, too, of Samwell Tarly, who had uncovered lost secrets and wielded them, bridging the gap between scholarly learning and the realm's dire need. Some said the old gods themselves guided his hand, others claimed he must have demon blood or a pact with shadows. Sam took neither claim to heart, knowing the truth was simpler and more profound. He was just a man who loved his friends and family enough to do whatever it took. Perhaps that was magic enough. Over time, Sam continued writing his accounts, gathering testimonies from others about the long night. The baby grew, learning to toddle across the courtyard, eventually learning to speak. Gilly told him stories of a father who banished the dead with a glowing black heart. The boy would squeal with delight, too young to grasp how much pain it had caused. Sam would tuck him into bed, hush him with lullabies about a new dawn, a future free of fear. As the seasons turned, Sam sometimes caught himself glancing northward, remembering the wall, the haunted forest, the place where he had first seen the White Walkers. He would recall how slender a thread had held the living from destruction. But then Gilly's hand would slip into his, or he would hear the baby's laughter, or see the sun break through the clouds over Winterfell, and he would let the memories subside. They had won. The realm was theirs to rebuild and cherish. And so it was that Samwell Tarly, armed once by books and once by darkest magic, stood at the threshold of a new era, not just for himself, but for all the living who had prevailed. The world stretched out before him as a place of new wonders, new dangers, but most importantly, hope. If ever a new threat arose, Sam doubted it would find the realm unprepared, for the lesson of the long night would not soon be forgot. And should the realm forget, Sam had written it all down, carefully preserving the story in parchment and ink, so that the living would remember how close they had come to losing everything, and how they had emerged victorious, hearts united against the cold dark that once threatened to devour them all.